I hosted a party to celebrate my 60th birthday. My wife and my son handed me a gift. Inside it was a piece of paper that turned out to be an eviction notice and divorce papers. The business, the house, everything was gone. My son mocked me, saying I was a pathetic old failure. They burst out laughing. I signed the papers and walked out. But 1 week later there were 32 desperate phone calls. The night breeze brushed softly across my face. The smell of honey-glazed ribs drifted through the air. Lanterns hanging from the old oak tree cast a warm golden glow. I stood in front of the grill holding the same pair of meat tongs I had used for years. Around me were the voices and laughter of neighbors and longtime business partners. Today I turned 60 years old. 60 years of life filled with struggle and hard-earned victories. I had built Hendricks Construction from absolutely nothing. I once carried heavy bags of cement under the burning sun just to create the foundation for everything I now owned. I looked toward the main table. Chloe, my wife, was smiling gracefully while talking with her friends. She was wearing the emerald silk dress I bought for her last year. Paul, my son, stood beside her. He held a glass of wine and carried himself like the successful businessman I had always been proud of. A deep sense of satisfaction filled my chest. I told myself that all the hardship I endured had finally been rewarded with a peaceful and happy family. Suddenly Paul cleared his throat and lightly tapped his glass. The crowd fell silent and turned toward my son. "Dad, we have a special gift for you," Paul announced loudly. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket. Chloe stepped closer and placed her hand on my shoulder, her eyes shining with anticipation. "Open it, Robert," she whispered. I set the meat tongs down and wiped my hands on my apron. My heart began beating faster, a mixture of curiosity and emotion. I thought it might be tickets for a trip around the world, or maybe a family photograph framed in silver. Slowly I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers inside. The very first line I saw made my breath catch in my throat. "Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. I am truly glad you are here. Make sure you subscribe to follow my story all the way to the end, and leave a comment with the city you are watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled." Notice of termination of residency and eviction. I blinked, thinking I must have read it wrong. I turned to the next page. A unilateral divorce filing with terms that stripped me of every piece of our shared property. Everything inside my head started spinning. This house, this company, the bank accounts. None of it belonged to me anymore. I looked up at Chloe, hoping this was nothing more than a cruel joke. But her face had turned cold as ice. Her eyes were filled with a level of contempt I had never seen in 25 years of marriage. Paul stepped forward, tilting his chin at me with open arrogance. He leaned close to my ear, making sure I heard every poisonous word. "You are a pathetic old failure," Paul sneered. "Your time is over. Now it is time for you to disappear so I can run everything." Their laughter exploded right after that, loud and merciless. The guests around us began whispering, but not one person stepped forward to help me. I felt like a wounded animal being exposed in the middle of a crowd. The blood in my veins burned, then suddenly turned ice cold. I looked down at the papers, then at the fountain pen in Paul's pocket. "Give me the pen," I said, my voice dropping into something dangerously calm. Paul handed it to me with a victorious smile. I signed my name on those documents with firm, deliberate strokes. The scratching sound of the pen cutting across the paper felt like the sound of my own heart breaking. I removed the apron that said "World's #1 Dad." I placed it on the table right beside the plate of ribs, still steaming with heat. I did not say another word. I turned around and walked away, leaving behind the bright lights and the people who had betrayed me. I stepped out through the gate with less than $400 in my pocket. But in the middle of that collapse, a single thought flashed through my mind. They had forgotten who laid the foundation of this kingdom. I walked along the sidewalk of the wealthy neighborhood. Most of the mansions here had been built by my company. Every brick, every fence carried the mark of my sweat. I remembered 3 years ago when I became seriously ill. Chloe cried beside my hospital bed and said she needed power of attorney to protect the family. Because I loved her, because I trusted her, I signed without a single doubt. It turned out she had been preparing for this day from that very moment. She and my son had been quietly moving assets for a long time. They isolated me from major projects. They convinced me I was getting old and needed to step back. This betrayal hurt far more than any physical wound I had ever suffered. I stopped at an old gas station at the end of the street. I pulled out my worn wallet and checked inside. $327. That was all I had left after 30 years of devotion. Enough for one night at a cheap motel and a few simple meals. But when I looked at my reflection in the gas station window, I saw a man who had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man in the world. Paul thought he had won because he had the money. Chloe thought she had won because she had the house. But they were wrong. They had awakened an old lion that they should have left sleeping. I would not use a gun. I would not use a knife. I would take my revenge, using the same things that built my entire career: patience, strategy, and the cold precision of a master builder. This game had only just begun, and the ending would make them regret it for the rest of their lives. I staggered along the dark road. Paul's laughter still echoed faintly behind the iron gate. My mind drifted back to the winter of 2023. That was when the severe pneumonia made my lungs feel like they had frozen solid. I was lying in a hospital bed at the Central Medical Center. Around me was the lifeless beeping of heart monitors. Chloe sat beside me, her eyes red from crying. She held my hand, those warm hands I had trusted for so many years. "Robert, the company is in trouble without your signature," she sobbed. "The suppliers are threatening to stop deliveries. The workers are worried because they have not been paid." She placed a thick stack of documents in front of me. She said it was only a limited power of attorney to handle temporary matters, so that I could focus on recovering without worrying about the business. At that time, my mind was clouded by antibiotics and a fever that refused to break. I looked into my wife's eyes and saw nothing but sincere concern. I picked up the pen and signed exactly where she pointed. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I had signed a full power of attorney that could not easily be reversed. I had handed them the key to the treasure I spent 30 years building. The moment I was discharged from the hospital, the changes began quietly. Paul started changing the passwords to the internal management systems. He said it was to protect company information from competitors. Chloe began taking over every email account and every phone call from the banks. Whenever I wanted to review the books, they used my health as a shield. "Dad needs to rest. The doctor said you must not deal with stress," Paul would say. They arranged long vacations for me in distant places. It turned out that was their way of isolating me from my most loyal partners. They fired the master craftsmen who had fought beside me for decades. They replaced them with people who only knew how to obey Paul. Tonight, standing under the dim streetlight, I finally understood the entire truth. This birthday party had never been meant to celebrate my life. It was a victory celebration for two traitors. They waited until every legal procedure was completely finished. They waited until I no longer had any value left for them. Paul stepped out onto the balcony of the house and looked down at me standing outside the fence. He held a stack of documents and threw them into the air. Sheets of paper fluttered down like pale moths in the night. "Those are copies of the tax reports you signed," Paul shouted. "Everything is completely legal, dear father. You cannot sue. You cannot take anything back, because you were the one who handed it all to us with your own signature." I watched the papers fall into a dirty puddle beside the road. The anger inside me ignited, burning away the shock that had frozen me moments earlier. I had not only lost my home, I had lost my faith in people. I looked back at the mansion one last time. Those dazzling lights now looked more like a glittering tomb, a tomb that had buried my kindness and my trust. I turned away and walked toward the town center. I needed somewhere to rest and think. I needed to find the weakness in the perfect trap they had built around me. They believed I had been disarmed. They believed I was just an old man waiting to die in poverty. But they forgot something important. The blueprint of that entire house still existed inside my head, and I knew exactly which wall to strike to bring their whole structure crashing down. I would make them regret letting me walk out of that gate alive. I stopped in front of the flickering neon sign of the Sunset Motel. The letters S and T were broken, leaving only the word UNS glowing dimly through the light drizzle. It was the cheapest place I could find on the edge of town. I pushed open the stained glass door and stepped into the reception area. A middle-aged man with a scruffy beard looked at me with open suspicion. "One single room," I said, my voice rough from the cold. $50 a night." "Pay in advance," he replied shortly. I pulled a $50 bill from the small stack of cash in my wallet. My hand trembled slightly, as I placed it on the scratched wooden counter. He handed me a metal key attached to a red plastic tag. Room 12. End of the hallway on the left, he muttered, already turning back to the television. I walked down the hallway on a carpet that smelled of dampness and years of cigarette smoke. The door to room 12 opened with a dry squeal from hinges that had not seen oil in a long time. The space inside was cramped and suffocating. A single bed with a thin, worn blanket, an old television sitting on a crooked wooden shelf, and a small window overlooking a trash-scattered parking lot. I closed the door, locked it, and sat down on the edge of the bed. The weight of reality began pressing down on my chest. Just a few hours earlier, I had been the owner of a multi-million-dollar estate. Now I was sitting in a cheap room that even my workers would have complained about. I took out my wallet and emptied everything onto the mattress. A few wrinkled bills, my identification card, and the final balance on my phone's banking app, $327. I stared at my hands under the flickering fluorescent light on the ceiling. These calluses were proof of 30 years of labor. They had built dream homes for thousands of people, yet now they could not even hold onto a roof for the man who built them. I collapsed onto the bed, staring blankly at the stained ceiling. The loneliness of 60 years old crashed over me like a violent wave. I remembered the warm dinners I once shared with Chloe. I remembered teaching Paul how to read his very first construction blueprint. All of it had been a carefully staged performance. They had patiently waited for me to grow old. They had patiently waited for the moment I became vulnerable enough to take everything from me. The roar of a truck engine outside the motel startled me back to reality. I realized I could not lie here feeling sorry for myself. Their betrayal might have been a sentence, but I would turn it into a declaration of war. I sat up and opened the only bag I had managed to take with me. Inside there were no expensive clothes, only my identification papers and a small iron box. That box carried memories from the days when my parents were still alive. I placed my hand on the cold metal surface. In the darkness of the Sunset Motel, I made a silent promise to myself. Paul and Chloe might have taken my money, but they could never take my mind or my will. Tomorrow I would begin finding my way back, step by step, even if I had to start from the ashes. This rock bottom was not where my story ended. It was where I would begin laying a new foundation stronger than any structure I had ever built before. I reached over and switched on the old desk lamp. The weak yellow light trembled across the surface of the small iron box. It was the only thing I managed to grab when they forced me out of the house. Paul used to call it my pile of nostalgic junk. But to me, it was the last thread connecting me to the people who had truly loved me. I opened the lid. The dry scrape of metal echoed softly in the quiet room. Inside were a few medals from my college years, several black and white photographs of my parents, and a thick, light brown envelope resting at the bottom. Across the front, written in my mother's careful handwriting, were the words, "For Bobby." My throat tightened the moment my fingers touched her handwriting. My mother had been a frugal woman. She worked as a seamstress for years before opening a small bakery. She always told me, "A man needs an escape route when the storm comes, Bobby." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside were not old letters. It was a savings book and a stack of deposit certificates. I opened the book and the numbers seemed to dance under the dim light. The final deposit had been made 2 months before she passed away. With decades of accumulated interest, the balance had reached $91,000. I froze. $91,000. To a millionaire, it would be pocket change for a minor project. But to a man sitting at rock bottom with only $327 left, it was a fortune. It was my mother's blood, sweat, and silent sacrifice over an entire lifetime. She had hidden it away. She never told my father. She never even told me. As if she had somehow foreseen the day her son would lose everything. I shuffled through the remaining papers. A short letter slipped out, the ink slightly faded. "Bobby, if you are reading this, it means life has become difficult for you. Do not feel ashamed to accept help from your old mother. Use this to start again because you are the finest builder I have ever known." Tears fell onto the page, blurring the word builder. While I had been busy building castles for people who would betray me, my mother had quietly built a lifeboat for me. I gripped the savings book tightly in my hand. Chloe and Paul believed they had drained the last drop of blood from me. They had no idea that a mother's love could reach beyond death to protect her child. This money was not just capital. It was salvation. It was proof that I was not alone in this fight. I looked out the small window. In the distance, the city lights still burned brightly. The plan for my revenge began to take shape more clearly in my mind. I would not waste a single dollar. That $91,000 would be the first brick, the brick that would shatter Paul's arrogance, the brick that would throw Chloe out of the house she had stolen. I placed the savings book back into the iron box and locked it carefully. Tonight, for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of calm. Their betrayal had been a death sentence for family bonds, but it had also been the rebirth of my strength. Sleep, Robert, I told myself. Tomorrow, the hunt begins. I was about to close the iron box when my fingers brushed against another rough layer of paper. It was wedged beneath the lining at the bottom of the box. I pulled it out carefully. It was an old land ownership certificate, yellowed with age, stamped sometime in the 1970s. The document listed the owner as my Uncle Thomas, my late bachelor uncle, who had passed away many years ago. A faint memory returned to me. He had left me a piece of land on the northern edge of the city. At the time, I had been at the peak of my career, managing dozens of multi-million-dollar construction projects. That 12-acre patch of weeds and gravel had felt more like a tax burden than an asset, so I forgot about it completely. Paul and Chloe certainly had no idea it even existed, because it had been inherited directly from the Hendricks family long before I married Chloe. I opened my phone, dust still clinging to my fingers, and started searching through the city planning maps. My heart began pounding when I saw the location on the newest satellite map. The land sat right along the border of the North Technology Development District. The city had recently announced plans to expand the roadway and build a new belt route cutting directly through that area. Property values there had skyrocketed over the past 2 years. What had once been worthless wilderness was now a potential gold mine. I checked several recent land transactions nearby. $137,000 per acre. 12 acres. The number forming in my mind forced me to hold my breath to stay calm. This was the leverage I needed. They believed they had taken everything by freezing the company accounts. But they could not touch what they did not know existed. The legacy of the Hendricks family was rising to protect the last heir who still carried its integrity. I looked out the window of the Sunset Motel as darkness slowly retreated before the first light of dawn. A detailed plan began forming in my mind like a 3-dimensional architectural blueprint. I would not sell the land immediately for quick cash. I would use it as collateral to rebuild my legal credibility. I would construct a new fortress on the very foundation they had overlooked. Chloe wanted money. She would watch money turn to dust. Paul wanted power. He would watch power collapse beneath the feet of the father he had mocked. I carefully placed the land certificate back into the box beside my mother's savings book. Tomorrow morning, my first destination would not be my old company. It would be the office of an old friend, the only man honest enough to stand against Chloe's army of lawyers. I lay down, but my eyes refused to close. I could still see Paul laughing at me during the party. Laugh while you can, my son. You took away what I built over 30 years. But I will take back everything, and the souls of the traitors along with it, and I will do it within a few short months. This battle is no longer about money. It is about proving that a true builder can never be defeated by those who only know how to steal the work of others. The sun had risen, and with it came the beginning of their end. 8 in the morning. I stood in front of the office building of Tom Bradley. Tom was an old lawyer known throughout the city for his integrity and for legal counterattacks that showed absolutely no mercy. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, and a brass bell rang sharply. Tom looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses. His thick eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Robert, I heard about the party last night," he said quietly. "The whole city is talking about how your wife and son threw you out of your own house." I placed my bag on his desk and pulled out my mother's savings book and the yellowed land certificate. "I did not come here for sympathy, Tom," I replied coldly. "I came for justice." We spent the next 6 hours dissecting every detail of the documents. Tom studied each page of the power of attorney I had signed in the hospital. His eyes stopped at a small clause near the bottom of the final page. "They were clever, Robert," Tom said, tapping the paper lightly. "They inserted a clause allowing the appointed party to transfer shared marital assets. But in their greed, they made a fatal mistake." I held my breath. Tom slid my Uncle Thomas's land certificate back across the desk. This property is separate inherited land from before your marriage. Under the law, even with a full power of attorney, they cannot legally transfer or control separate inherited property without explicit written consent from you for that specific purpose. And that is not all. Tom gave a faint knowing smile. Your mother's savings account is also a direct personal inheritance. Any attempt by Chloe to merge it into marital assets or freeze it would be illegal. A surge of electricity ran through my spine. The wall they built was beginning to crack. Tom continued flipping through company documents related to Paul's management. He fired the old accountants and replaced them with his own people. That is a classic sign of someone trying to hide questionable financial flows, Tom said calmly. I looked him in the eyes, feeling the fire of revenge growing stronger. I want the power of attorney revoked immediately, I said firmly. And I want you to draft a notice to the banks establishing my exclusive ownership of the northern land. Tom nodded, his fingers already moving quickly across the keyboard. We are not just going to defend ourselves, Robert. We are going to strike their weakest point, their arrogance. I will submit the revocation of the power of attorney at the exact moment they are executing a major financial transaction. Their accounts will freeze at the very moment they believe they have already secured victory. I left Tom's office late in the afternoon. In my pocket was now a perfectly structured legal strategy. I walked down the street, watching the crowds moving quickly through the city. Chloe and Paul were probably enjoying their luxurious life inside my house. They had no idea that the sword of justice had already begun to slide out of its sheath. My silence today was not surrender. It was preparation for a storm they could never imagine. Everything they built on deception was about to collapse like a sandcastle before the tide. I did not stop with the lawyer's office. Real revenge requires more than legal paperwork. It requires the naked truth about your enemy. I used a small portion of my mother's money to hire an independent financial investigator. He was an old bloodhound of a man I had once helped when he was just starting out. 2 days later, we met at a quiet diner on the edge of town. He slid a thin folder across the table, but its contents carried enormous weight. Your son is not the business genius he thinks he is, Robert, he said. Paul is a professional debtor in the online gambling world. I opened the folder and felt my chest tighten. Paul had lost more than $200,000 on illegal offshore betting platforms. To cover those losses, he had done something unforgivable. He had secretly mortgaged the family home for $185,000. The house where I personally laid every single brick of the foundation. The house Chloe once swore she loved more than her own life. But that was not the end of it. Hendricks Construction had become nothing more than an empty shell. Paul had been using deposits from new construction projects to pay off his personal gambling debts. He now owed wages to workers and payments to dozens of subcontractors and material suppliers. A rot deep to the bone was spreading through the heart of the empire I built. He had not only betrayed me, he was destroying the Hendricks legacy itself. I scanned the list of stalled projects. One name stood out immediately: the Morrison Estate Project. Margaret Morrison was one of my most respected and demanding clients. She was known for having zero tolerance for delays or compromised quality. At that moment, I realized I had found their Achilles heel. Paul was desperately trying to keep everything hidden by using the power of attorney to drain the company's remaining reserve funds. If I cut off that financial lifeline now, the entire structure he built would explode. Creditors would descend like vultures smelling blood. And Chloe would finally realize that the son she protected was nothing more than a reckless destroyer. The truth was more bitter than I expected. But it gave me an absolute advantage. I did not need to destroy them myself. All I had to do was allow their greed and stupidity to destroy them. I paid the bill, gathered the folder, and stepped outside into the harsh sunlight. Inside my mind, a new move had already been placed on the board. I would contact Margaret Morrison. I would show her the truth about the man currently managing her project. And I would offer her a solution she could not refuse. Paul believed he had already won by taking control of the Hendricks name. But he forgot something important. Clients trusted that name because of me. Without credibility, a name is nothing more than a piece of paper. I tightened my grip on the folder, feeling strength returning to my bones. My enemies were digging their own grave. My only job now was to make sure there was no escape when the ground finally collapsed beneath them. I sat in my temporary office, a narrow room that still smelled of fresh paint. On the glass door, the words "Hendricks Renovations" were still drying. This was the new company I had just established using the money my mother saved for me. I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over one name: Margaret Morrison. She was a steel-willed woman who never tolerated delays. I pressed the call button. "Robert, I thought you retired to some island somewhere." Her sharp voice came through the phone. "I did not retire, Margaret. I am just cleaning up the ruins," I replied. I told her the truth about Paul's financial situation and the reality behind the construction of her mansion. Her face must have turned pale when she heard the number tied to my son's gambling debts. 1 hour later, we met at the stalled construction site. Machines stood silent. Workers sat around talking, unpaid and restless. Mrs. Morrison watched as Paul tried desperately to explain something to a material supplier who was demanding payment. My son looked pathetic in his expensive suit, his eyes darting around in fear. I stepped out from the shadow of the corridor. Paul froze. The coffee cup in his hand trembled. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he stammered. I did not answer him. I looked straight at Margaret Morrison. "I will take over this project with my new company," I said calmly. "I do not need a deposit. All I need is for you to sign a direct contract with me. I will personally cover the material costs using my land as collateral." Mrs. Morrison nodded without hesitation. "Paul, you are fired," she said coldly. I watched my son's face change from red to ghost white. "You cannot do this. You signed power of attorney to Mom," he shouted. That was when I pulled the notice from Tom Bradley out of my folder. "That power of attorney was revoked at 8 this morning, Paul," I said slowly. "Every account you plan to use to cover your gambling debts has been frozen for investigation. You do not have a single dollar left to move around anymore." He collapsed onto the ground among the scattered bricks and concrete. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was a defeated man staring into the abyss. If you have stayed with this story until this moment, please take a quick second to subscribe. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs nothing, and it helps us more than you know. I turned and walked away, ignoring the angry shouting of creditors who were now surrounding Paul. If this story meant something to you, press like and help share the message about resilience. My journey to reclaim justice was now 3/4 complete. Every step I took now was calculated like an architectural blueprint. I knew Chloe was probably at home at that very moment, trying to use her credit cards, only to have them rejected. Soon she would realize that the luxurious house she stole had become nothing more than a cage without food. I returned to my small office and opened the project blueprints for the Morrison estate. I would work through the night. I would rebuild the reputation of the Hendricks name with these very hands. Paul and Chloe believed they could steal my career with paperwork, but they forgot something. A career does not live on paper. It lives in the trust of the clients. And that trust is something they were never worthy of owning. Tonight, I will sleep deeply, because tomorrow the 32 desperate phone calls I promised you about will finally begin ringing. The circle is about to close, and satisfaction will belong to those who stood with integrity. Monday morning. I sat in my new office with a cup of black coffee, no sugar. The phone rested quietly on the wooden desk, silent, like a ticking bomb waiting to explode. I had already sent every piece of evidence of Paul's embezzlement to the board of directors and the company's largest creditors. I had also filed a formal request to freeze the house since it had been illegally mortgaged. At exactly 9:15, the desk began to vibrate. The first call, Paul. I let it ring until it stopped. The 5th call, still Paul. By the 10th call, it was Chloe. I answered, but said nothing, only listening. "Robert, what have you done? Why was my card declined at the grocery store?" Chloe screamed, her voice shaking with humiliation. "Creditors are standing at the front door. They are trying to repossess Paul's car. You have to unlock the accounts right now." I hung up without saying a word. The phone kept vibrating violently on the desk. Call 15. Call 20. Then call 30. Paul started sending frantic messages, shifting from threats to desperate begging. "Dad, please, I am begging you. They are going to send me to prison. I just had a little bad luck. You cannot be this cruel. I am your only son." I looked at the messages, my heart cold as winter stone. When they threw me out of the house on my birthday night, did they remember I was their husband and father? The 32nd call came as the sun was setting. I turned on the speaker. Paul's sobbing voice filled the room, mixed with Chloe's shouting and the voices of repossession agents in the background. Dad, please. They are sealing the house. I have nowhere to go. I took a deep breath. My voice echoed calmly through the empty office. Paul, you called me a pathetic old failure. You said my time was over. So why would a successful man like you need to beg a failure? You lost the only person who would have helped you the moment you chose to betray me. There is no we here anymore. There is only you and the consequences you created. He cried out, his voice breaking. Are you just going to let me die like this? I am not abandoning you, I replied coldly. I am simply letting you stand on the same feet you used to kick me out of my own home. Goodbye, Paul. I ended the call. That was the final one. Outside the window, I watched tow trucks pulling away their luxury cars. Chloe stood in the yard with 2 suitcases beside her, her face stunned as if she still could not believe what had happened. That shining mansion, those bright lights, were now nothing more than cold concrete that no longer belonged to them. Justice does not always come from a courtroom. Sometimes justice is simply allowing greedy people to taste the same cruelty they once delivered to others. The circle had closed. And tonight I was the only one who still had a real home to return to. A home built on truth, not on deception. 1 year later, I sat on the porch of a small but elegant villa that I designed and built with my own hands. Hendricks Renovations had become a leading company in the heritage restoration field. Half of my Uncle Thomas's land had been sold, giving me complete financial freedom. The remaining money I used to establish a scholarship fund for construction students who come from difficult backgrounds. I later heard that Chloe was now working at a roadside diner in another state. She serves the very people she once would not even look at. Paul is currently going through rehabilitation and working manual labor jobs to slowly pay off his debts. I do not hate them, but I will never go back. Some doors once closed should never be opened again. I watched the sun slowly setting behind the city's new buildings. Life has taught me one simple truth. It is never too late to start again. You can lose every possession you have, but if you keep your dignity and your strength, you can rebuild everything. What do you think about my journey? Do you believe I should forgive my son? Let me know your thoughts below. Do not forget to press like and share if this story gave you strength. I am Robert, and this is Dad's Real Life Revenge. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I smiled and took a sip of tea. The future ahead felt wide open and peaceful, because now I know that every brick I place from this moment forward will be a brick built on truth. I stood in front of the gleaming glass doors of the Chase Bank. In my hands was a worn blue folder with frayed corners. The cold morning wind slipped through my thin coat, but it was nothing compared to the coldness inside my heart. I looked at my reflection in the glass. A 68-year-old man with hands covered in calluses from working double shifts for 30 years. I sacrificed everything to raise my son. But what did I get in return? After my son got married, he started treating me like an old debt that needed to be thrown away. But today inside this bank, I was about to sign a surprise gift that would leave them with nothing. Welcome to the channel Dad's Real Life Revenge. I'm Arthur. Stay with me until the end of this story because you are going to be shocked. And do not forget to leave a comment with the name of the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Everything began 3 years ago when David brought Samantha home. Back then I smiled. I thought I was gaining a daughter. At first, Samantha was as sweet as honey. She praised my garden. She promised she would take good care of David. But right after the wedding, the mask began to crack. Dad, Samantha said as she raised an eyebrow and looked around the living room. This house feels so outdated. The smell of old wood makes me feel suffocated. I think we should sell it and buy a modern apartment downtown instead. I tightened my grip on the coffee cup in my hand. This was the house my late wife and I built together. Every brick carried our sweat and sacrifice. But Samantha did not care. Her eyes were not looking at me. They were fixed on the wall behind me where I kept the property documents. I saw a flash of ambition in those sharp eyes. I chose to stay silent because I loved my son. I did not know that silence would become the beginning of a cruel plan. Samantha's presence in the house was like icy water, seeping into every crack of my family. She started with little things. Moving my wife's flower vase, replacing the cream-colored curtains with cold gray fabric. Then she began cutting the ties between David and me. Our joyful weekend dinners slowly disappeared. In their place came excuses about being busy, family outings I was never invited to. Samantha was incredibly skilled at isolating me. She created an atmosphere that made me feel like an unwanted stranger inside my own home. The breaking point came last Christmas. In 56 years, I had never spent Christmas alone. That morning I woke up early. I prepared pancake batter and warmed the maple syrup. I eagerly waited for Leo's laughter and David's familiar high five. But the house was frighteningly silent. I walked upstairs and found their room empty. A note was taped to the refrigerator. Dad, we took Leo to Samantha's parents' house for Christmas. Samantha said you needed some quiet rest. David. I stood frozen in the empty kitchen. The sound of my fork touching the porcelain plate echoed harshly through the silence. For the first time in my life, the maple syrup on my pancakes tasted bitter with abandonment. I ate in the dark because I could not bear the emptiness of the room around me. Samantha had succeeded. She had turned me into a ghost inside my own home. I looked out the window and saw the neighbors' lights sparkling warmly. They were laughing together, and I was alone with fading memories. Every bite I swallowed felt like a stone pressing deeper into my chest. I wondered what David was thinking. Did he remember all the Christmases when I worked extra night shifts just to buy him the toys he dreamed of? Probably not. Samantha had brainwashed him too well. My patience had limits. I was willing to ignore everything until what happened at Leo's birthday party. That was the moment I realized this woman's cruelty had no bottom. Leo's 5th birthday party was a terrible day. I had spent an entire month working in the woodworking shop downstairs. I carefully carved each wheel by hand. I polished the body of the train with the finest natural oil I could find. It was a wooden oak train, and I had engraved Leo's name along the side with all the pride of a grandfather's heart. I wanted my grandson to have something truly meaningful, something powered not by batteries but by imagination. When I carried the gift into the room filled with shiny wrapped boxes, Samantha looked at it with obvious disgust. She did not even bother touching it. "Oh, look at that," she said mockingly. "An old dusty toy. Dad, you do realize Leo only plays with toys that meet international safety standards, right? That wood could have splinters. It could scratch his hands." I froze. David stood there, but he would not look me in the eyes. Instead, he bent down and adjusted an expensive remote-controlled airplane. Samantha picked up my wooden train using only the tips of her fingers, as if she were holding a bag of garbage. Then she tossed it into a cardboard box in the corner of the room. The box for things that were about to be donated or thrown away. "Just leave it there," Samantha said to David. "I don't want cheap junk taking up space in our son's room." My chest tightened with pain. That was not just a toy. It was my sweat, my effort, and my love carved into wood. And David stayed silent. He had completely chosen his wife's side. In that moment, I felt like a stranger interrupting the party of wealthy people who no longer needed me. Quietly, I walked away while they began cutting the birthday cake. No one noticed I was gone. I returned to my room and shut the door behind me. I sat there in darkness, feeling the collapse of the family I had spent my entire life building. Samantha did not just want my assets. She wanted to erase my existence. She wanted me to disappear just like that wooden train. The hurt inside me slowly transformed into a cold, burning hatred. I was no longer sad. I started watching. I started listening. And that was when I realized Samantha was hiding a secret far darker than her arrogance. 3 days after Leo's birthday party, my phone rang at 8 o'clock that evening. It was Samantha. Her voice over the phone sounded sweet, rustling like dry leaves underfoot. But I could feel the poison hidden beneath it. "Dad," she said softly, "David and I have been thinking a lot about your future. You've been forgetful lately. This house is far too big and dangerous for an elderly man living alone. We think it's time you had some professional financial planning." I tightened my grip on the receiver. The financial planning she talked about was really a death sentence for my freedom. She started mentioning a retirement home in the suburbs, a place she called paradise for seniors. But I knew it was nothing more than a glass cage where she could easily control everything I owned. The next morning I quietly went to the Chase Bank. I did not tell David. I wanted to review my savings accounts myself. When I sat across from the financial advisor, she looked at me with sympathy in her eyes. "Mr. Arthur," she hesitated, "3 days ago, a woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law came here. She brought an unsigned power of attorney form and asked very detailed questions about your current balances. The blood in my veins turned cold. Samantha had already come here before me. She was not waiting for my permission. She was hunting down every dollar I had spent my life saving. She wanted to know how large the prey was before swallowing it whole. I walked out of the bank. The sunlight was bright and golden, but I felt freezing cold inside. Samantha was not just a gold digger. She was a ruthless predator. She was studying guardianship laws. She wanted to prove I was mentally unstable so she could strip away my right to control my own life. I sat down on a stone bench in the park across from the bank and watched people passing by. That was when I realized I could no longer remain a sheep waiting to be slaughtered. If Samantha wanted to play a financial game, I would show her who truly controlled the board. But first, I needed to know whether she was drowning in debt or planning something far darker. I pulled out my phone and called an old friend. "Miller, I need your help. I want you to investigate someone." The truth that was coming would hit harder than any of us expected. Detective Miller arranged to meet me at a small diner on a quiet street corner. He slid a brown folder across the table toward me. The worry in his eyes was impossible to hide. "Arthur," he said quietly, "your daughter-in-law is more than just greedy. She's standing at the edge of a cliff." I opened the file. Numbers began dancing before my eyes. Samantha owed $63,000 to a casino in Atlantic City. She had been using David's credit cards to stay afloat, but things had spiraled beyond control. The debt was growing every single day under vicious interest rates. That was why she was desperately trying to force me to sign over the house. She needed cash fast, before debt collectors came knocking at her door. But that was not even the worst part. Miller flipped to another page. This is her computer search history. Samantha had been carefully researching the symptoms of early-stage dementia. She had been looking into ways to fake medical reports and declare me mentally incompetent. If she succeeded in gaining guardianship, every asset I owned would fall under her control, and I would be locked away in some cheap nursing home for the rest of my life. Rage erupted inside me like a volcano. I had started wondering whether I truly was getting old. But now, I felt sharper than ever before. Samantha thought I was a weak old man, an easy target. She had no idea that before retirement I spent my entire life dealing with ruthless and manipulative people in business. I closed the folder slowly. "Thank you, Miller," I said. "Now I know exactly what I need to do. I would not just protect my assets. I would let Samantha dig her own grave with the endless greed consuming her soul." I returned home wearing a quiet smile. I began pretending to forget little things. I left my keys in the wrong places. I repeated the same questions again and again, and every time I acted confused I saw Samantha's eyes light up with excitement. She believed her plan was working perfectly. What she did not know was that I was weaving a massive trap, and she was the prey. My revenge began with an unbelievable number. I needed bait large enough that she would never be able to resist it. The recording device I placed on the table was actually nothing more than a garage door remote. But the truth, Samantha confessed, would destroy this marriage forever. I began my performance on a Saturday afternoon, while everyone was gathered in the living room. I pretended to search through my coat pocket for an old document. Then I muttered loudly enough for Samantha to hear. "Oh, this memory of mine. I have no idea where I put those stock certificates. And the coastal property papers, too, not to mention the trust funds. Altogether, it's worth more than $4 million. I saw Samantha freeze instantly. The wine glass in her hand tilted so sharply it almost spilled. Her entire expression changed. The usual contempt vanished, replaced by wild hunger. I could actually see her pupils widen. Even the sunlight reflecting off the broken glass outside the porch was not as sharp as the greed awakening inside her. "What did you just say?" Samantha stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You have stocks and real estate worth $4 million. Why have we never heard about this before?" I pretended to look confused. I stared at her with dull, distracted eyes. "Didn't I mention it before? Maybe I forgot. Those investments go back to when I was still working in the city. I plan to leave everything to Leo when he grows up. But lately I haven't been feeling well. Maybe I should find someone trustworthy to manage it for me." Samantha took a deep breath. Then she sat beside me and grabbed my rough, calloused hand. Her fake kindness was so exaggerated it made me sick. "Dad, you can trust us," she said softly. "David is your son, and I'll take the best care of you. You don't need to worry about those numbers anymore." I looked straight into her eyes. I could see calculations moving faster than a computer behind them. She was already figuring out how much of the imaginary $4.4 million would erase her gambling debts, and how much would remain for designer handbags and luxury vacations. In reality, I only had $200,000 in savings. But that fake fortune was the perfect bait. That entire evening, Samantha treated me like royalty. She cooked all my favorite meals. She gently tucked a blanket over my shoulders. But later, standing in the darkness of the hallway, I saw her hurriedly whispering into her phone. She was preparing the final paperwork to seize a treasure that did not even exist. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. I had lifted her to the peak of hope, and now it was time to take her to visit the very place where she intended to throw me away. Samantha could not wait another second. Early Monday morning, she drove me around to visit several nursing homes she had already chosen for me. She called it a practical tour, to find the best retirement place for my future. I sat in the passenger seat pretending to doze off, but through half-closed eyes I watched every movement she made. Samantha drove with the confidence of someone who already believed she owned millions. She hummed softly to herself, as if the fortune was already sitting in her pocket. We stopped at a facility hidden deep beyond a thin forest. From the outside it looked elegant and expensive, but inside the place radiated a terrifying coldness. While a consultant guided us through the building, Samantha pulled aside the manager for a private conversation. I remained behind a thin wall and listened carefully. "If I sign full power of attorney," Samantha asked in a cold voice, "can you guarantee he won't be able to leave on his own? I want him under special supervision. He shouldn't have too much contact with the outside world. It could worsen his confusion." My chest tightened with rage. She did not just want my money. She wanted to erase my existence. She wanted to lock me inside a prison disguised as a nursing home, while she freely spent the money I had sacrificed my entire life to earn. I stepped back into view wearing my best dazed expression. I nodded at everything she suggested. Samantha smiled with satisfaction. She believed I was completely under her control now. "All right, Dad," she said as we returned to the car. "This afternoon we'll go to the Chase Bank and sign the power of attorney documents. That way you won't have to worry about managing those $4 million anymore. I'll take care of everything for you." I stared out the car window. The passing trees looked like scenes from my life flashing by. I remembered my late wife. I remembered David as a little boy clinging to my leg. And now, I was heading toward the bank for the final step of my plan. When we walked into the Chase Bank lobby, Samantha straightened my collar like a loving daughter. She whispered sweet lies into my ear about a peaceful future. What she did not know was that Detective Miller was already waiting inside the office with evidence she could never deny. The office door slowly opened. The bright neon light spilled across Samantha's glowing face, shining with ambition and greed. This was the moment every mask would finally be torn away. We sat inside the VIP office of the bank. Samantha placed the power of attorney documents on the table, her hands trembling with excitement. She pushed the pen toward me. "Dad, you just need to sign right here," she whispered. "All your burdens will disappear." I picked up the pen, but I did not look at the papers. I looked directly into Samantha's eyes. The greed burning inside them was terrifyingly obvious. Then I slowly placed the pen back down. "I'm not signing," I said in the calmest and coldest voice I could manage. Samantha froze instantly. The smile on her face stiffened. "What do you mean?" she stammered. "Dad, you must be confused again. Let me help you." "No, Samantha, I'm not confused. And I'm not mentally unstable." I leaned closer. "I know about the $63,000 debt in Atlantic City. I know about the times you sneaked into my room searching for property documents. And I also know about your plan to lock me inside a nursing home so you could steal my assets." The color drained from Samantha's face before turning dark with panic. She tried to jump out of her chair, but at that exact moment the office door opened. Detective Miller walked in carrying a thick stack of evidence detailing her attempts to forge medical records, declaring me mentally incompetent. Samantha started breathing heavily. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape. "You're insane," she screamed. "You can't do this to me. I'm your family, and what about the $4 million? Are you just going to let it rot?" I smiled bitterly. "That's the best part, Samantha." I paused. "The $4 million never existed. It was bait. I wanted to see how far you were willing to go for greed. I only have $200,000 in this account, and you will not receive a single cent. If you have been listening this far and want stories like this to keep coming, hitting the like button and subscribing truly helps. 97% of people never do, but that small act is what keeps this entire channel alive. Samantha completely collapsed into the leather chair. Her usual arrogance vanished. All that remained was a pathetic woman, finally facing the truth. But her nightmare was only beginning. Suddenly, she exploded in rage and revealed her true nature completely. "You manipulative old man," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You think you've won? I'll take Leo away. You'll never see your grandson again." Samantha shot to her feet. She swept the folder off the table, sending papers flying everywhere, her face twisted with fury. "You think you're so clever," she screamed at me. "I'll destroy your life. I'll take Leo and disappear from this state. You'll grow old and die alone without ever touching a single hair on that boy's head again." I remained seated. I looked at her with nothing but pity. Then the office door opened once more. This time it was not a bank employee. David walked in. His face looked pale and exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot with disappointment and pain. In his hand was a stack of divorce papers that had already been prepared. Samantha froze completely. Her lips trembled. "David," she whispered, "what are you doing here? I can explain." "There's no need," Samantha David replied in a hoarse voice. "I was in the next office listening through the internal speaker system. I found out about your gambling debts 3 days ago because of Dad. I didn't want to believe it. I kept hoping you would stop. But trying to throw my father into a nursing home just to steal his money is unforgivable." David placed the divorce papers on the bank table. Beside them, he set down a temporary restraining order issued by the court. "You're not taking Leo anywhere," David said firmly. "I've already arranged temporary custody proceedings. You should focus on dealing with your legal problems with the casino." Samantha collapsed onto the floor. She burst into desperate sobs and grabbed at the leg of David's pants, begging for forgiveness. But David stepped back. He looked at her like she was a stranger, a predator finally caught in the trap created by her own greed. I stood up and placed my hand on my son's shoulder. I could feel him trembling. The truth always hurts. But sometimes it is the only medicine strong enough to save what remains of a family. Samantha looked up at me with pure hatred burning in her eyes. In that moment she realized she had lost everything. No money, no power, no family. David and I walked out of the bank together, leaving Samantha behind with her desperate screams echoing through the hallway. The afternoon sunlight stretched long across the sidewalk outside. I took a deep breath, but our story was not truly over yet. The stormy days finally faded into the past. Samantha was forced into gambling, rehabilitation, and faced investigations for financial fraud. My house no longer carried the coldness of manipulation and deceit. David moved back in with me so the two of us could raise little Leo together. We spent many afternoons side by side in the woodworking shop downstairs. The sound of the saw and the scent of fresh oak brought peace back into my soul. Sunday dinners returned to the backyard once again. The smell of grilled meat filled the air, while Leo's laughter rang across the lawn as he pushed his wooden train through the grass. David looked at me with deep regret in his eyes. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for letting blindness cloud my judgment." I smiled and held my son's hand. "What matters is not how we fall," I told him. "What matters is how we rise together." I sat down one evening to write a new will. I still decided to leave a small trust for Samantha. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted her to have one real chance to rebuild her life after prison. I believe in mercy. True revenge is not destroying your enemy. It is living a happy life without allowing hatred to poison your heart. I watched Leo carefully holding the wooden train Samantha once wanted to throw away, and in that moment I understood a priceless truth. The richest person is not the one with the most money. It is the one surrounded by people who love them for who they truly are. Money can appear and disappear in an instant, but love, loyalty, and honor are treasures no amount of wealth can ever buy. My journey at the bank that day came to an end, but it also opened the door to a new chapter filled with hope for my family, and that is how I protected what mattered most. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If this story helped you appreciate the value of family, share it with the people you love most. And do not forget us here at Dad's Real Life Revenge. I stood by the window looking up at the star-filled sky, and I knew that somewhere out there were still fathers suffering through injustice in silence. But remember this: the truth always finds a way to come into the light. My wife had just been laid to rest, and the dirt on her grave hadn't even dried yet when my daughter-in-law walked up through the pouring rain and told me to pack my bags for a cheap nursing home. She called me a senile old man and a freeloader, not realizing she had just awakened a monster that had been sleeping for 20 years. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a glass of water, some snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. The sharp click of Savannah's high heels echoed across the wet stone pathways of the cemetery. The overpowering scent of her expensive yet somehow cheap-smelling perfume completely drowned out the smell of damp earth and funeral flowers surrounding us. She stood there beneath a black umbrella that concealed half of her heavily made-up face. Not a single word of condolence. Not a single bow before Ivan's grave. She looked at me with the cold stare of someone examining an old piece of furniture that needed to be thrown away. Savannah tossed a thin folder down in front of me. Raindrops from Atlanta splattered across the plastic cover, smearing the surface. Then she spoke in a shrill, commanding voice. "Listen carefully, Dad. The house may be in Terrence's name, but it's our money. Mom is gone now, and you can't manage the place by yourself. I've already reserved a spot for you at Green Valley Nursing Home. The van will come pick you up tomorrow. Just sign this." I stood motionless in the rain. My old, worn-out coat was soaked through heavy on my shoulders. I trembled, letting my shoulders sag, and my knees appear weak and unsteady. I looked at Savannah with the vacant, confused eyes of an elderly black man who had lost his grip on reality. "Savannah," I whispered, "Ivan was just buried. Let me stay here and pay my respects to her. I don't want to go anywhere. This is your mother's and my home." Savannah let out a mocking laugh. The twisted smile on her face revealed the full depth of her greed. "Stop acting senile, Dad. You're just getting in our way. Sign it, and I'll have Terrence pack your things. Don't make me use stronger measures." She yanked a pen from her purse and shoved it into my trembling hand. Inside, my blood began to boil. The helpless old man she saw was nothing more than a perfect disguise. Deep within me, the razor-sharp mind of a financial bloodhound officially awakened. The ultimate predator had returned. "Savannah, you have no idea who you've just provoked. You think I'm a useless old man. Enjoy this brief moment of victory while you can. I will make you pay for every single cent." I took the pen, still pretending that my hand was shaking, and scribbled an unsteady signature across the authorization form. Savannah snatched the papers away and turned to leave. The sound of her heels gradually disappeared into the curtain of rain. I watched her walk away and slowly clenched my fist. The game had officially begun. The night settled over the cemetery. The cold Atlanta rain continued pouring down without mercy. I stood alone beside Ivan's freshly covered grave. Bending down, I placed the final white rose on the waterlogged earth. The promise I had made to her remained unchanged. I would protect Terrence. I would protect this family's legacy. A tall figure emerged from the darkness beyond the trees. It was Victor, my longtime neighbor and the only loyal friend I had left. He said nothing. Quietly, he held an umbrella over me and placed a steady hand on my shoulder, which was trembling from the cold. "Come on, Warren," Victor whispered. "My truck is parked over there. It's time to lay all the cards on the table." The old vehicle sped through the darkness toward the outskirts of the city. Our destination was an abandoned warehouse, hidden behind a cluster of ancient trees. The place was damp year-round, filled with the smell of rotting wood and rusted metal. Nobody paid attention to it, especially not Savannah. In her eyes, it was nothing more than a worthless pile of junk. She was wrong. Victor pushed open the rusted steel door. The hinges groaned loudly in protest. He flipped a switch. Flickering fluorescent lights sputtered to life, revealing a secret room concealed behind a wooden wall. I stepped inside. My chest tightened. This was Ivan's war room. Every wall was covered with charts, surveillance photographs, and financial records marked with red ink. Ivan had been quietly investigating Savannah for 2 years. She knew her daughter-in-law was having an affair. She knew Savannah had been draining assets from our son behind his back. At the center of the room sat an old black reel-to-reel recorder. I walked over and pressed play. Static crackled through the speaker. Then Ivan's voice emerged, weak yet unwavering. "Warren, if you're listening to this tape, it means I'm no longer with you. I'm sorry for keeping this from you. But Savannah and the people around her are dangerous. They're targeting Terrence. They want to take everything from him. Open the hidden drawer beneath the desk. Your weapon is inside. Please reclaim justice for me." The recording ended with a sharp click. A heavy silence filled the room. I dropped to my knees on the damp warehouse floor, tears mixed with the rainwater still clinging to my face. The grief inside me transformed into a towering fire of rage. Slowly I stood and opened the hidden drawer exactly as Yvonne had instructed. Inside sat a black velvet box. I opened it. A flash of cold silver reflected through the darkness. Inside was an exquisitely engraved luxury fountain pen and an encrypted memory card. I picked up the pen and wrapped my hand around it. Its weight steadied me. Its weight reminded me exactly who I was. I turned toward Victor. The confusion and weakness of a senile old man had vanished from my eyes. What looked back at him now was the gaze of a hunting wolf that had finally found its prey. I knew exactly what had to be done. Those greedy parasites were going to pay. But the most terrifying discovery was not the pen. It was the first audio file stored on the memory card. The voice recording did not contain only Savannah. There was another man. A man whose voice made my blood run cold. Because the secret he revealed was powerful enough to destroy my son's entire life in a single moment. A deep, gravelly voice echoed from the audio file stored on the memory card, sending a chill down my spine. It belonged to Preston Sinclair, one of the most notorious tycoons in the city. He and Savannah were plotting to swallow the life's work of my son. Their plan was simple and ruthless. They would frame Terrence, push him toward criminal charges, and seize everything he had built. I stopped the recording. The sharp click echoed through the dark warehouse. I stared at the silver pen resting in my hand. Memories from 20 years ago came flooding back like a tidal wave. There was a time when Atlanta's financial world trembled at a single name: Warren Vance, forensic auditor, the IRS's ultimate bloodhound. I had once been a true predator. Whenever I smelled dirty money, someone eventually went to prison. I brought down dozens of tax-evading corporations and dismantled international money laundering networks that stretched across multiple countries. Then I walked away from all of it. When Yvonne gave birth to Terrence, I made a promise. I would put down my sword. I wanted to be an ordinary father. I wanted my son to grow up in peace instead of being surrounded by enemies and revenge. For 20 years I buried my identity. I willingly wore worn-out clothes. I played the role of a slow, forgetful old black man whose only concern was taking care of his family. But my patience had only fed the greed of monsters. They saw me as easy prey. They thought they could trample on Yvonne's legacy and destroy Terrence's future. They were terribly mistaken. A bloodhound never loses its instincts. It merely sleeps. And now Savannah herself had awakened it. I removed the rain-soaked coat I had worn from the cemetery. Then I straightened my back. My body no longer trembled. My eyes had become as cold and sharp as steel. I turned toward Victor and spoke with the firm authority of a man accustomed to command. "Victor, I need a list. Every subsidiary Preston Sinclair owns. Every bank account Savannah controls. I don't want a single dollar overlooked." Victor stared at me. Respect flashed across his face. He nodded immediately. "Yes, sir. I've been waiting 15 years for this day. The bloodhound has returned." I walked out of the abandoned warehouse. The rain was still falling, but my mind had never been clearer. I would return to that house. I would show Savannah what a real performance looked like. I would let her celebrate her victory. I would let her grow comfortable inside her own stupidity. And then I would push her straight into the abyss she had dug for herself. I pulled out my phone and called Terrence. My plan was to pretend I was devastated and heartbroken to tell him Savannah had thrown me out. But the moment the call connected, something unexpected happened. Instead of hearing my son's voice, an unfamiliar voice answered, cold, threatening, and completely devoid of mercy. "Mr. Vance," the stranger said quietly, "if I were you, I would stop asking questions about Preston Sinclair." My grip tightened around the phone. The voice continued, "Your wife died because she got too close to the truth." A wave of icy rage swept through me. For a moment I could hear nothing except my own heartbeat. Then the stranger delivered one final sentence, the sentence that changed everything. "And if Terrence learns what his real role is in this operation, he won't live long enough to regret it." The line went dead. I stood frozen beneath the rain, because for the first time that night I realized this was no longer about greed. This was war. The voice on the other end of the line let out a cold, mocking laugh. It ordered me to return home immediately. Terrence was in serious trouble. I ended the call. My heart was pounding, but my mind remained perfectly calm. The dirty game had started sooner than I expected. I headed straight back to my house. The moment I stepped through the front door, chaos greeted me. My small office had been completely ransacked. Books, documents, and old files had been torn apart and scattered across the floor. Savannah stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily. In her hands was one of Terrence's golf clubs. Her eyes looked wild, animalistic. The instant she saw me, she charged forward. "You damned old man," she screamed. "Where did you hide Terrence's intellectual property files? Give them to me right now." Immediately I let my shoulders slump. I shrank into the corner. I clutched my head and pretended to be terrified. "I don't know," I muttered through fake sobs. "I don't know anything. Yvonne, please help me. Savannah has gone crazy." Then everything happened at once. The sound of Terrence's car pulled into the driveway. Savannah heard it too. A vicious spark flashed through her eyes. Without hesitation, she clawed at her own neck. She ripped open part of her blouse, sending buttons flying. Then she deliberately slammed herself into the edge of a dressing table. A bruise instantly began forming on her forehead. She collapsed to the floor just as Terrence rushed through the front door. Terrence ran to her side. Savannah pointed directly at me while sobbing uncontrollably. "Honey, your father has lost his mind. I was only trying to help clean his room and he attacked me. He even threatened to kill me. Look what he did." Terrence turned toward me. The look in my son's eyes was a mixture of disappointment, pain, and helplessness. "Dad," he shouted, "how could you do this?" I offered no defense. Instead, I stared back with the vacant expression of a confused old man. Savannah sniffled dramatically before pulling a document from her purse. It was a power of attorney agreement, giving her control over Terrence's assets and business interests. She spoke softly, guiding him exactly where she wanted him to go. "Do you see now? Your father isn't mentally competent anymore. You need to sign this and let me manage the company. Otherwise, he'll destroy everything." Terrence was completely under her influence. He picked up a pen. He was seconds away from signing. I knew I had to act. Staggering forward, I snatched the papers from his hands. I laughed foolishly. "Let me sign. I love signing things." Savannah smiled to herself. Certain she had won, she eagerly handed me the pen she had prepared, but she had no idea what had just happened. Moments earlier, I had switched her pen with the thermal ink fountain pen from Yvonne's secret warehouse. I signed my name. Then I encouraged Terrence to sign beside mine. Savannah immediately grabbed the paperwork. She stared at the signatures with complete satisfaction. Victory radiated from her face. She believed she finally had everything she wanted. What she didn't know was that the special ink would disappear completely within 24 hours. No trace, no signature, no evidence. Her performance had been flawless. But my trap was even better. Within an hour, Savannah had packed her things and convinced Terrence to leave with her. According to her, they were meeting Preston Sinclair that very night. Soon the house was silent. I stood alone in the darkness. The foolish smile vanished from my face. I opened my encrypted laptop. A secure tracking program immediately loaded onto the screen. Then my blood ran cold. Terrence's phone had been transmitting normally only minutes earlier. Now the signal was gone. Completely gone. The last recorded location flashed on the screen, an abandoned section of the old harbor. I zoomed in on the map. The signal hadn't simply died. It had been deliberately disabled. My instincts screamed the truth before my mind could fully process it. Terrence was not attending a business meeting. He was walking into an ambush. I grabbed my keys and reached for the phone to call Victor. But before I could dial, another alert suddenly appeared on the screen. A hidden security camera near the harbor had uploaded a fresh image only 30 seconds earlier. The photograph loaded slowly. When it finally became clear, every muscle in my body locked in place. Terrence was on his knees. 2 armed men stood behind him, and standing directly in front of my son was Preston Sinclair himself. Smiling. Terrence's tracking signal went dead at the harbor. The instincts of a forensic auditor told me this was a trap. But I couldn't afford to act recklessly. If I wanted to save my son, I needed leverage over the mastermind behind all of this. That man was Preston Sinclair. At midnight, I arrived at Sinclair Corporation's downtown tower. I wasn't driving a luxury car. I wasn't wearing a pinstripe suit. Instead, I wore the blue work uniform of a janitor. I pushed a cleaning cart loaded with disinfectants and mops. In the world of the wealthy, elite, elderly, black janitors like me were completely invisible. They looked straight through me as if I were an empty wall. They freely discussed million-dollar secrets right in front of me because they assumed I was a poor, illiterate, senile old man. That invisibility was my superpower now. I pushed the cart into the service elevator and went directly to the 51st floor. That was where Preston Sinclair's secure executive office was located. The hallway was silent except for the soft sound of my work shoes against the thick carpet. Security cameras covered every angle, but Victor had helped me disrupt the camera loop for exactly 5 minutes. I had 300 seconds. I lightly swiped a universal access card across the electronic lock. The heavy oak door opened without a sound. The billionaire's office was enormous, filled with the scent of premium cigars and expensive wood. Stacks of financial documents were neatly arranged on his desk. I didn't touch them. A professional auditor never leaves evidence of moved objects. I knelt down, pretending to clean beneath his massive solid wood desk. My right hand quickly pulled a miniature military-grade listening device from my pocket. It was no larger than a shirt button. I pressed it firmly into a narrow gap beneath the desk directly below Preston's office telephone. The device activated. A tiny red light flashed once and disappeared. Connection established. Footsteps and laughter echoed from the hallway. Savannah and Preston were returning to the office earlier than expected. I immediately stood up, grabbed my mop, lowered my head, and continued working. The door swung open. Preston and Savannah entered. His arm was wrapped around her waist. A smug grin stretched across his cunning face. They walked right past me without so much as a glance. Savannah tossed her expensive handbag onto the desk and spoke in a flirtatious voice. "Darling, everything is done. That idiot Terrence signed the papers. The senile old man signed too. By tomorrow, the company will be ours." Preston burst into laughter and tightened his arm around her waist. "Excellent. Let's see how that kid handles the mountain of debt I've prepared for him." I quietly pushed my cleaning cart out of the office. The door closed behind me. I entered a restroom on the same floor and put on my secure earpiece. The audio feed from Preston's office came through clearly. But just as I prepared to listen to the next stage of their plan, a phone call interrupted everything. The call changed the entire situation. The voice on the other end wasn't discussing profits or dividing assets. It was the panicked scream of a man in complete terror. He was reporting that every dollar of dirty money hidden in Sinclair Corporation's secret Swiss accounts had just been completely frozen by an unknown force. I smiled in the darkness of the restroom. The mysterious force that had frozen Preston Sinclair's accounts was me. One confidential phone call using an old IRS identification code had triggered an emergency asset freeze order. This financial war was only beginning. The following morning I returned home. I changed out of the janitor's uniform and slipped back into my worn sweater. Then I sat at the kitchen table and slowly prepared a pot of chamomile tea. Savannah walked into the house, looking exhausted. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes after a night of panic alongside Preston. As usual, she looked at me with pure contempt. "Old man," she snapped, "why are you still here? Why haven't you moved into the nursing home yet?" I didn't react. Instead, I looked up and gave her a harmless, absent-minded smile. I slid a cup of hot tea toward her. "Savannah," I said in the shaky voice of a confused old man, "have some tea. I saw you up very late last night. You and Preston must be exhausted." The moment Preston's name left my mouth, Savannah froze. Her entire body went rigid. The teacup trembled in her hand, splashing hot tea onto the table. The color drained from her face. Then it returned as a sickly shade of green. "What did you just say?" she stammered. "How do you know who Preston is?" Immediately I blinked several times and looked around in confusion. I scratched my head and chuckled. "Preston? What Preston? I didn't say Preston. I was talking about you and Terrence. My memory isn't very good these days. Yvonne always said I talk nonsense." Savannah stared at me. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She searched desperately for a crack in my performance. She found none. For the first time, doubt began to gnaw at her. Was I truly senile, or was I pretending? Silence settled over the room. Only the steady ticking of the clock could be heard. With a single name, I had planted a seed of fear inside her mind. Now she would torture herself with it. Savannah couldn't handle the pressure. She snatched up her purse and hurried toward the door. Moments later, her car sped away from the driveway. She was running to Preston. She needed reassurance. She needed answers. I watched her leave. The harmless smile vanished from my face. My eyes hardened into cold steel. The psychological attack had worked perfectly. The enemy was beginning to unravel from within. I stood up and poured the cold tea down the sink. It was time to abandon the disguise completely. My next stop was Fidelity Bank. The next phase of the takeover plan was waiting. I pulled out my phone to review the latest reports on Preston's frozen assets. Then the screen lit up. An anonymous message had arrived. Attached was a photograph. The image instantly drained every trace of satisfaction from my body. Terence was tied tightly to a chair. The room around him was dark, windowless, industrial. Whoever had taken the photograph wanted me to see every detail. But that wasn't the worst part. Beside my son stood a large digital countdown clock. Bright red numbers glowed against the darkness. 2 hours. That was all the time remaining. Beneath the photograph was a single message. No greeting, no explanation. Just one sentence. You can destroy Preston Sinclair's empire, Warren, or you can save your son. You do not have enough time to do both. For the first time since this war began, I felt genuine fear. Not for myself. For Terence. Then a second notification appeared. A location pin, followed by another message. And the name at the bottom made my blood freeze. Because the sender wasn't Preston Sinclair. It wasn't Savannah. It wasn't anyone I had been hunting. The message was signed by someone who was supposed to have died 20 years ago. Michael Vance. The photograph of Terence tied to a chair tightened something deep inside my chest. A terrifying wave of rage surged through me. But 20 years as a financial bloodhound had taught me one fundamental truth. The more violence your enemies resort to, the closer they are to collapse. 2 hours was more than enough time to tear apart everything Preston Sinclair had built. I walked out of the house and abandoned the disguise completely. Victor was already waiting beside the car. He handed me a black crocodile leather briefcase and a perfectly tailored pinstripe suit. I put on my armor. Then I fastened a small bronze badge to my lapel, a symbol of authority I had not displayed in 2 decades. The Warren Vance the world feared was finally returning. Our car sped toward Fidelity Bank, the institution holding nearly all of Sinclair Corporation's major loans. I stepped into the grand lobby. The hunched, confused old man was gone. My back was straight. My chin was raised. My eyes were sharp as a drawn blade. The security guards instinctively moved aside as I passed. Without slowing down, I walked directly into the executive office. The bank president looked up, already preparing to throw out an uninvited visitor. Before he could speak, I dropped a thick audit file onto his desk. The man's face instantly lost all color. His hands began to shake. He rose to his feet. Mr. Vance, his voice barely worked. How may I assist you? I sat down calmly. Preston Sinclair owes your institution $8 million due within days. The room became silent. I want to purchase the entire debt. Immediately. The executive swallowed hard. Sir, that type of transaction normally requires several days of review. I leaned forward. The look in my eyes ended the conversation. You have 5 minutes before I begin asking questions about every suspicious transaction connected to Sinclair Corporation. The man practically threw himself at his keyboard. 3 minutes later, emergency transfer documents were sitting in front of me. I opened the black briefcase. Inside rested the silver fountain pen Yvonne had left behind. My weapon, my signature, my promise. I uncapped the pen and signed. One clean stroke. $8 million changed hands. The debt was now mine. Preston Sinclair no longer owed a bank. He owed me. And that meant I possessed the legal leverage to strip away everything he valued. His buildings, his offices, his holdings, his empire. I stood and adjusted my pinstripe jacket. Then I checked my watch. 1 hour and 20 minutes remained. Tonight was the Innovation Gala. Preston and Savannah believed they would be standing beneath bright lights, celebrating victory. They believed the future belonged to them. What they didn't know was that I had already built the financial coffin waiting beneath their feet. I had just stepped outside the bank when Victor came running toward me. His face was twisted with panic. Without saying a word, he thrust a portable radio into my hands. A weak voice crackled through the speaker. It was Terrence. He was crying. Dad, Dad, don't do what they want. Then the transmission dissolved into static. A metallic sound followed. Sharp, distinct, terrifying. The unmistakable click of a firearm being loaded. Every muscle in my body tightened. A different voice came onto the channel. The same cold voice that had been manipulating events from the shadows. This time there was no mockery. No games. Only a threat. Warren Vance. The man spoke my full name slowly. You've spent 20 years hiding from who you really are. A second metallic click echoed through the radio. Then came a muffled groan from Terrence. My grip tightened so hard that the plastic casing nearly cracked. The stranger continued. You have exactly 1 hour. His voice remained calm, almost amused. Come to the gala and destroy Preston Sinclair, or come save your son. A pause followed. Then he delivered the sentence that made my blood run cold. Because if you choose the wrong door tonight, only one member of the Vance family will still be alive by sunrise. The transmission ended. Silence. Victor stared at me. The city skyline glittered in the distance. 1 hour remained. One choice. One chance. And for the first time since Yvonne's death, I realized the true enemy might never have been Preston Sinclair at all. The entire ballroom froze. Hundreds of eyes shifted from Preston Sinclair to the black envelope in my hand. Not a single person spoke. The massive LED screen behind the stage glowed softly, waiting. Preston tried to regain control. His voice cracked despite his efforts. What is this nonsense? I smiled. The kind of smile that appears only when the hunt is over and the trap has already snapped shut. You want to know what's inside this envelope, Preston? I slowly turned toward the audience. So do I. A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the crowd. Then it died immediately. Because nobody was laughing anymore. I handed the envelope to Victor. Without a word, he removed a memory drive and inserted it into the presentation system. The giant screen flickered. Then the first image appeared. A series of bank transfers, millions of dollars moving through shell corporations, layer after layer, country after country. The audience gasped. Preston's face went white. The second image appeared. Photographs. Savannah and Preston together. Private meetings, luxury resorts, secret apartments, dates and timestamps covering nearly 2 years. Savannah staggered backward. No. The word escaped her lips as a whisper. The third file appeared. Audio recordings. The entire ballroom heard Preston's voice. Clear, undeniable, discussing plans to acquire Terrence's research, discussing fabricated debt, discussing forged contracts, discussing how to remove obstacles, including members of the Vance family. The room erupted. Executives began shouting. Investors stood up from their tables. Several reporters rushed toward the front. Flashes exploded throughout the ballroom. Preston's empire was collapsing in real time. Then I raised my hand. The room gradually fell silent again. That is not why I came here tonight. Every head turned toward me. I pointed at the giant screen. The affair, the theft, the fraud. Those are merely symptoms. The real disease is greed. The screen changed again. This time it displayed legal documents, loan transfers, debt assignments, corporate filings, ownership records, one after another, one after another, one after another. Preston stared at them. His breathing became uneven, because he recognized every document, and he understood exactly what they meant. I reached into my jacket and removed a single sheet of paper. Then I looked directly into his eyes. This afternoon I purchased the primary debt secured against Sinclair Corporation. The room exploded with murmurs. Preston's knees nearly buckled. No, his voice sounded weak. Impossible, pathetic, defeated. I continued. As of 6:43 this evening, every major asset pledged against that debt became subject to immediate enforcement. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, I delivered the final blow. Preston Sinclair, you no longer own Sinclair Corporation. The words hit him like a freight train. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His empire, his buildings, his offices, his prestige, his reputation, everything was gone. The audience watched in stunned disbelief as one of Atlanta's most powerful men realized he had become a spectator to his own destruction. Beside him, Savannah looked equally horrified. She turned toward Preston. Preston turned toward her. The affection between them vanished instantly. Only blame remained. Only fear. Only survival. Then the ballroom doors opened. Federal agents entered in a coordinated line. The lead agent stepped forward holding a folder. Preston Sinclair. Savannah Brooks. You are both being detained pending investigation into fraud, conspiracy, financial crimes, and related offenses. The room erupted once more. Savannah collapsed into a chair. Preston attempted to speak. Attempted to negotiate. Attempted to threaten. Nobody listened. For the first time in his life, his money could not save him. The agents moved forward. Handcuffs clicked. Cold. Final. Permanent. Yet as I watched them being escorted away, I felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Only one question remained unanswered. Because throughout this entire war, one mystery still lingered. The anonymous messages. The kidnapping. The voice from the shadows. The name that should not have existed. Michael Vance. The man presumed dead for 20 years. As the agents led Preston away, a phone in my pocket vibrated. One new message. One photograph. My heart stopped. The image showed Terrence sitting safely inside an FBI vehicle. Behind him stood a man wearing a dark coat. His face was finally visible. Older. Scarred. Very much alive. At the bottom of the photograph was a single sentence. The war against Preston was only Chapter 1, Warren. Now it's time for us to discuss what really happened 20 years ago. The giant LED screen illuminated the entire ballroom. Forensic audit reports filled the display. Money laundering trails. Tax evasion schemes. Hidden shell corporations. Debt purchase agreements connected to Sinclair Corporation. The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Whispers spread like wildfire. Investors stared in disbelief. Reporters rushed forward. And Preston Sinclair simply stood there, frozen. Then his knees gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto the stage. I signaled to the federal agents. Within moments, Savannah and Preston were escorted away from the growing media frenzy and into a storage room behind the stage. The heavy wooden door shut behind us. The noise from the gala faded. Only silence remained. Silence and fear. The room smelled of old paper dust and desperation. I placed 2 black envelopes on the table. Then I looked at them both. This, I said calmly, is your financial death sentence. Checkmate. Savannah lunged forward and tore open the nearest envelope. Her hands shook so violently that she ripped the paper. Inside were official federal warrants. Supporting documentation. Debt transfer records. Proof that I now controlled the obligations that had once kept Sinclair's empire alive. The color drained from her face. Her lips trembled. No words came out. Then she collapsed at my feet. Preston's survival instincts activated instantly. He didn't even glance at the woman standing beside him. Instead, he rushed toward me. The powerful billionaire dropped to his knees. Mr. Vance, his voice cracked. She manipulated me. Savannah approached me first. She stole Terrence's research. She forced me into this. I'm innocent. Please, you have to believe me. The desperation would have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic. Savannah looked up in shock. Disbelief. Pain. Rage. Only minutes earlier, Preston had been whispering promises into her ear. Now he was throwing her overboard to save himself. Something inside her snapped. She launched herself across the room. You liar. Her nails raked across his face. Blood appeared instantly. You told me to get rid of Warren. You told me to push Terrence out. You planned everything. Preston staggered backward. Then he struck her. The slap echoed through the room. Shut up, his face twisted with hatred. You were nothing but a pawn. The two of them exploded, screaming, accusing, confessing, every lie, every betrayal, every crime. They revealed everything while federal agents watched silently. The scene was almost surreal. 2 predators who had spent years destroying other people's lives were now tearing each other apart, like rats fighting on a sinking ship. I stood quietly in the corner, arms crossed, watching. The silver pen Yvonne had left me rested in my breast pocket. For a moment I thought of her. Justice had finally arrived. The truth had won. Greed had consumed itself. The federal agent stepped forward. Cold steel handcuffs closed around Savannah's wrists, then Preston's. The sound was final. Savannah began crying uncontrollably. Her elegant red gown was torn and wrinkled. Mascara streaked down her face. She looked at me, begging, "Please, Dad, I made a mistake. Give me one chance." I didn't hesitate. "I am not your father." My voice cut through the room like ice. "The law will answer you now." The agents escorted them away. Camera flashes exploded outside the storage room. The downfall of Savannah and Preston would be front-page news by morning. I should have felt relief. Instead, a strange uneasiness settled over me. Something wasn't finished. Something bigger still lurked in the shadows. I stepped back into the main corridor. My first thought was Terrence. I needed to see my son. I needed proof with my own eyes that he was safe. Before I could take another step, Victor approached. His expression was unusually serious. In his hands was a small, rust-covered metal box. "We found this inside a hidden compartment in Preston's private safe." He handed it to me. The moment I saw the symbol engraved on the lid, the world seemed to stop. My pulse disappeared. The hallway vanished. The voices vanished. Everything vanished. Because I knew that symbol. I hadn't seen it in 20 years. Not since the night that changed my life forever. It was the insignia of a covert financial task force, a unit that officially never existed, a unit whose members had either disappeared or died. Slowly, my fingers closed around the box. Victor noticed the change in my face. "Warren," I didn't answer. My eyes remained locked on the emblem. Because only 4 people in the world had possessed that symbol. 3 of them were dead. And the 4th was the man whose name had appeared in the anonymous messages. The man everyone believed had died 2 decades earlier. Michael Vance. My younger brother. With trembling hands, I opened the rusted box. Inside lay a faded photograph, a classified government file, and a handwritten note. The note contained only 6 words. 6 words that shattered everything I thought I knew. Yvonne knew the truth all along. The black rose emblem engraved on the rusted metal box left me motionless for a moment. It was the symbol of the underground financial organization I had sworn to destroy 20 years earlier. Preston Sinclair had never been the true mastermind. He had merely been a pawn on a much larger chessboard. Slowly, I placed the box inside my leather briefcase. A greater war might await in the future. But tonight, justice for my family had finally been served. 1 month later, the court delivered its verdict. Savannah was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her role in the kidnapping conspiracy and financial fraud. Preston Sinclair received a 12-year sentence for money laundering and organized criminal activity. All illicit assets belonging to Sinclair Corporation were seized by the government. Savannah's parents, who had enabled and encouraged their daughter's greed for years, were forced out of their luxurious mansion. They returned to a life of poverty and humiliation on the outskirts of the city. It was a fitting ending for those who had spent their lives sowing destruction. I returned home. The cold Atlanta rain had finally passed. Warm morning sunlight now filled the sky. I removed the powerful pinstripe suit. I returned Yvonne's silver pen to its place inside the war room. Then I put on my familiar old sweater once again. Stepping into the small backyard garden, I paused. White roses were blooming everywhere beneath the morning sun. The scent of damp earth and fresh flowers filled the air. Terrence walked outside and stood beside me. The color had returned to his face. The fear and confusion were gone. He was no longer the naive engineer who had allowed himself to be manipulated. He had grown stronger, wiser. His company was secure. His patents were protected. His future belonged to him once again. Together we stood quietly among the white roses swaying in the breeze. And in that peaceful moment I knew Yvonne was finally at rest. Life is full of turns we never expect. Sometimes you will encounter people who mistake kindness for weakness. People who see generosity as something to exploit. But remember this, being kind does not mean being weak. Being gentle does not mean being powerless. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is the gathering of strength while waiting for the right moment. Never mistake an older person's silence for defeat. True power is not found in shouting. It is found in the truth patiently prepared and carefully revealed. The harshest revenge against evil is not violence. It is the firm hand of justice. It is watching those who built their lives through deception lose everything they stole. Live with integrity. Protect your family. Defend the values that matter most. And never lose faith in justice. If you enjoyed this ending, please share the story. Have you ever had to teach an arrogant person a lesson about respect? I'd love to hear your story. Thank you for listening. Just one seat at the graduation ceremony showed me exactly where I stood in my own family. It began with a phone call I was never supposed to overhear, and ended with a silence so heavy it crushed everything inside me. For 17 years, I had never missed a single milestone in Jasmine's life. Today was her graduation day at Howard University. I woke up at 5 in the morning. I carefully ironed my best shirt. I slowly tied the necktie Jasmine had given me for my birthday 3 years ago. I was proud. I was happy. I truly believed I was the luckiest father in the world. But my world collapsed, right there in the entrance hall. Diane walked toward me with a cold expression on her face. She would not even look me in the eyes. She handed me a small piece of paper and whispered in a quiet but merciless voice, "You should sit in the backup seats at the back. The front row belongs to Marcus. Jasmine needs graduation photos with her real father. Having you there would ruin the perfect family picture." Her words stabbed straight into my chest. I stood frozen among the crowd. I looked down at the ticket in my hand. Seat 15. The very last row. The place reserved for unwanted guests. The place hidden behind the bright stage lights. Up front, Jasmine was smiling brightly in her graduation gown. She threw her arms around Marcus, the man who had not paid a single dollar in child support for 17 years. The man who only showed up after all the hard work was already done. "Dad, I did it," Jasmine shouted happily. And she was not talking to me. I stood there, holding a bouquet of deep red roses. I had handpicked every single flower for my daughter. Without realizing it, I squeezed the stems tighter and tighter. Sharp thorns pierced deep into my skin. Warm blood trickled down, slowly, soaking through the silver wrapping paper. But that physical pain meant nothing compared to the humiliation tearing through my soul. Had I really spent my entire life raising a child with my own blood, sweat, and sacrifice, only to be treated like a stranger in the end? Welcome to Dad's Revenge Real Life. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. You are going to love it here. Betrayal does not always come like a slap across the face. Sometimes it comes when the people you love ask you to step aside so someone else can enjoy the rewards of your sacrifice. I turned around and walked away. I left behind their fake laughter and hollow happiness. The thunderous applause echoing through the halls of Howard University sounded unbearable to my ears. I sat alone on an ice-cold stone bench outside the campus. The blood on my palms had already dried into dark stains. Memories from the last 17 years came flooding back like a slow-moving film, crushing my chest with every passing second. Jasmine was 7 years old that year. She came home sobbing because other children mocked her crooked teeth. Seeing my little girl cry tore me apart inside. Diane looked at me and sighed. Braces at that time cost more money than we could possibly afford. But I promised my daughter I would give her the best life I could. And I kept that promise. That was when my endless nights at the frozen warehouse began. My shift started at 10 at night and ended at 6 the next morning. I carried heavy boxes weighing dozens of pounds inside temperatures below freezing. My body trembled constantly. My fingers ached every time the weather changed. My back hurt so badly there were mornings when I could barely stand upright. But every month when I saw the savings growing little by little, I smiled. My love for this family was never built on sweet words. It was written in cold numbers on bank statements. Numbers bought with my sweat and blood. I denied myself everything so Diane and Jasmine could live comfortably and never feel inferior to anyone else. I believed my sacrifices were building a strong and loving home. But I was wrong. I was building a magnificent castle on sand. And sand always washes away. Today's betrayal was not sudden. It had been growing quietly for 17 years, fed by my own silence and tolerance. They had become so used to receiving my sacrifices that they no longer saw them as sacrifices at all. To them, my pain had become normal, expected. If you have ever felt taken for granted after giving someone everything, you had hit the like button. I slowly stood up. Then I threw the blood-stained bouquet of roses into a trash can beside the road. My patience had finally reached its limit. Did they really think I would continue sacrificing myself quietly in the shadows forever? No. My plan to reclaim justice began at that exact moment. The train of their perfect lives was about to crash downhill, the second the silent driver me finally let go of the wheel. I drove back to our house. My mind was completely numb, but my chest burned with rage. For 17 years I had lived inside a world built on cruel contradictions. I finally realized that I had only ever been the silent worker behind the curtain while someone else played the hero making empty promises. When Jasmine was 14, she dreamed of joining the city's professional ballet academy. The tuition for that prestigious arts program was outrageously expensive. Marcus showed up one evening carrying a bright red rose. He smiled confidently and promised Jasmine he would pay every cent of her tuition. Jasmine nearly exploded with happiness. She threw her arms around him, took pictures together, and posted them all over social media. Thousands of people liked the photo beneath the caption, "The best dad in the world." But 3 days later, the tuition bill arrived at our house. Marcus blocked Diane's phone number. Then he disappeared, without a trace. I was the one who quietly pushed my only motorcycle to a pawn shop and sold it to pay for Jasmine's classes. For an entire year, I walked to work through rain, snow, and freezing winds because I no longer had a vehicle. Jasmine never knew the truth. She still believed the money came from Marcus. And I stayed silent because I did not want to destroy the image of her biological father in her heart. My sacrifices had slowly turned me into air inside that house. And air is invisible. Nobody notices air until they start suffocating. Diane and Jasmine were always dazzled by Marcus's flashy promises and fake charm. They treated my sweat, exhaustion, and money as something ordinary, something expected. When Marcus bought a cheap bracelet, they treasured it like priceless gold. When I provided an entire stable life, they treated it as nothing more than the duty of a servant. This injustice had to end. Marcus's fake brilliance and their endless ingratitude had pushed me to the edge. They had no idea that the true face behind all those promises was about to be exposed in the most brutal way possible. And this was only the beginning. The breaking point came when Jasmine received her acceptance letter to Howard University. The tuition was an enormous burden. And just like every other time, Marcus appeared right on cue. He promised he would take care of everything. But 1 week before enrollment, he suddenly vanished again. He sent a short message claiming his investments had failed and that he was bankrupt. Jasmine cried until her eyes were swollen. Diane nearly lost her mind with panic. And once again I stepped in to carry the weight they could not bear. I made the decision to withdraw every dollar from the retirement fund I had spent half my life building. That money was supposed to protect me in old age. My hands trembled as I signed the withdrawal papers, but my heart felt strangely calm. I believed this sacrifice would finally prove the depth of my unconditional love. I believed they would finally understand who had truly stood beside them whenever storms came crashing down. I was wrong. That retirement fund bought me nothing except a betrayal so cruel it had been planned long before I ever discovered it. 1 week before the graduation ceremony, I came home earlier than usual because of severe back pain. The house was quiet. Then I heard whispers coming from the master bedroom. It was Diane. She was speaking to Marcus on the phone. I froze in the hallway outside the door. Diane lowered her voice and said softly, "Don't worry. Everything is going exactly as planned. Once Jasmine graduates, we can finally push that troublesome old man out of the family picture. Without his money, Jasmine never would have finished college anyway. But now she has a good job in the city. He's no longer useful to us." My entire body went numb. Then Diane continued, "We'll move into the new apartment Jasmine rented. You'll finally get to stand beside your daughter as the official father at all the high-class parties. And don't worry about this house. I'll force him to sign it over to me." Every word poured into my soul like freezing water. My ears rang. My heart stopped beating. The woman I had loved and protected for 17 years saw me as nothing more than a machine for money. They had waited for me to bleed myself dry so they could throw me away like a worthless rag the moment they no longer needed me. Do not scream so people can see your pain. Stand up and walk away the moment the graduation ceremony of exploitation begins. Hit like if you agree. That was the moment my patience finally died. The fragile contract called family had already been torn apart by their own hands. I did not cry. I smiled coldly in the darkness. They wanted to erase me from their perfect picture. Fine. But before I stepped out of that picture, I was going to burn the entire canvas to the ground. That night I began preparing a graduation gift that Diane, Jasmine, and Marcus would remember for the rest of their lives. I walked out of the halls of Howard University in complete silence. I did not wait for the graduation ceremony to end. I did not look back at their glowing smiles even once. That night I sat alone in my office. The room was completely dark. The pain inside me had disappeared. All that remained was a terrifying level of clarity. I picked up my phone and made 3 calls before dawn. The first call was to the property management company. I was the sole leaseholder for the luxury apartment Jasmine had rented downtown. In a cold and steady voice, I requested the immediate termination of the lease agreement. I agreed to forfeit the security deposit. The apartment would be reclaimed by the end of the month. Jasmine would no longer have a beautiful place to move into with her wonderful biological father. The second call was to the bank. I ordered every supplementary credit card belonging to Diane and Jasmine to be frozen immediately. For 17 years, they had used my money for designer clothes, luxury dinners, and glamorous lifestyles. As of tonight, that river of money had officially dried up. I was no longer the devoted husband. I was now a man, enforcing ownership over what belonged to him. The final call was to a real estate agency. The house we lived in had always belonged entirely to me long before the marriage. I instructed the agent to sell it immediately for 10% below market value. My only condition was speed. I wanted every legal procedure completed within 2 weeks. They thought I was just a foolish man who worked himself to death without asking questions. They believed they could drain every drop of my finances and casually throw me away afterward. They were wrong. I was the one who built their fake paradise with my own hands, and I could destroy it just as easily. This war had only begun, and they were still celebrating their victory, without realizing the ground beneath them was already collapsing. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, Diane and Jasmine will receive their first brutal slap from reality. Are you curious to see how they react when they realize the gold mine they despised has officially closed forever? Stay tuned for the next chapter to witness the full force of this reckoning. The next morning, Diane and Jasmine returned home just after sunrise. I was sitting calmly in the living room reading the newspaper and sipping a cup of bitter coffee. They walked inside, looking exhausted, but their smiles still filled the room. The moment Diane saw me, she started complaining. She grumbled that Marcus had once again forgotten his wallet during their celebration dinner at a 5-star restaurant the night before. Jasmine immediately defended her biological father. A great man like Marcus should not have to worry about petty money problems, she said proudly. I did not say a single word. I simply smiled. Their awakening began less than an hour later. On her way to work, Diane stopped at her usual Starbucks for one of her expensive coffees. Casually, she swiped the supplementary credit card I had given her years ago. Beep. The payment machine rejected it. The cashier gave her an awkward smile. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your card has been declined. Diane frowned in irritation and tried again. Declined. Again. This time, panic flashed across her face. Seconds later, my phone rang. The moment I answered, Diane exploded with fury. Lucas, what did you do to my account? Unlock the card. Right now I'm standing here humiliating myself in this coffee shop. My voice remained perfectly calm. There's nothing wrong with the card. I canceled it. Starting today, you can pay for your perfect little life yourselves. Then I hung up before she could scream another word. At the exact same time, Jasmine received an urgent email from the property management company. The message informed her that the lease for her luxury apartment had been terminated immediately. She was required to remove all her belongings before the 31st of the month. That was when real panic finally began spreading through both of them. For the first time in years, they realized the invisible support system surrounding their lives was disappearing piece by piece. The glamorous mask they wore so proudly was slowly being ripped away layer after layer. But this was only a light appetizer before the real punishment began. Tonight's confrontation at the dinner table would expose every ugly truth completely. Did they really believe they could corner me so easily? Then they should prepare themselves for the final audit from the man they once called the troublesome old burden. That night, the family dinner table turned into a cold execution chamber. Diane and Jasmine stormed into the house with fury burning across their faces. They slammed their hands onto the table and shouted directly at me. Have you lost your mind, Lucas? How dare you freeze our cards and cancel Jasmine's apartment? Do you have any idea how humiliated we were today? I did not flinch. Slowly, I pushed a thick stack of documents across the table toward them. It was the most detailed financial audit they had ever seen in their lives. I looked directly at Jasmine. My voice was as cold as ice. For 17 years, this is the exact amount I spent on both of you. $1,240,000. Your braces. Your ballet academy tuition. Your expensive education at Howard University. Every single dollar came from my sweat and blood. I leaned forward slightly. Marcus made promises. I was the one who carried them out. I was the one who emptied his retirement fund so you could hold your head high beside your wealthy classmates. And yet at your graduation yesterday, both of you pushed me to seat 15 in the back row so a man who contributed nothing could stand in the spotlight. Diane let out a mocking laugh. So now you're counting every penny you spent on your wife and daughter. That's pathetic. This house belongs to me too. You can't treat us like this. Without changing my expression, I pulled out one final document. The property ownership papers. And the completed sale agreement. I looked directly into Diane's eyes. This house was entirely mine before we got married. And I already sold it. You have exactly 2 weeks to remove every belonging you own. The new owner takes possession on the 15th. Jasmine suddenly burst into tears. She stared at me with shock, fear, and desperation in her eyes. Dad, are you throwing me away? Are you still my father? Slowly, I stood up. I looked at the daughter I had once loved more than my own life. Then I answered in a low but unshakable voice. I'm not throwing you away, Jasmine. I'm simply returning you to the place you chose for yourself. The front row beside your biological father. The room went silent. You already planned to erase me from your family picture after graduation. I'm only helping you do it a little sooner. Diane and Jasmine stood frozen in place. Their faces turned pale. Not a trace of color remained. The brutal truth had completely shattered the fantasy they had been living in. But the punishment was still far from over, because the real question had not been answered yet. What would happen when their beloved hero Marcus finally had to face? Diane completely lost control. She screamed hysterically and tore the audit papers into pieces, scattering them across the table like falling ashes. Then she unleashed the cruelest insults she could think of. You're a controlling monster, Lucas. You want to destroy your own daughter's future over a single seat. You're selfish. I watched the shredded papers drift through the air. Inside me, there was nothing left to shake. Diane's rage only proved one thing. They were terrified. Terrified of reality finally arriving at their doorstep. Without saying another word, I walked into my room and returned with the suitcase I had already packed. My voice was calm, cold, and final. You have exactly 2 weeks to leave this illusion behind. Move out willingly or be forced out. Your choice. This house no longer has anything to do with me. Then I walked toward the front door. I did not look back at Jasmine's late tears or Diane's violent outburst echoing behind me. The night air in Annapolis was cold and fierce. I walked slowly down the familiar street leading toward the main road. And there, beneath the dim glow of a streetlight, I saw Marcus's polished luxury car parked at the corner. Marcus leaned casually against it, scrolling through his phone with a smug smile on his face. Maybe he was waiting for Diane to bring him the good news about the house transfer. Or maybe he was fantasizing about his glamorous future, beside a Howard University graduate daughter he had never spent a single dollar raising. This time I walked directly toward him first. The moment Marcus saw the suitcase in my hand, he straightened up nervously. I looked directly into the calculating eyes of the man who had betrayed me for 17 years. Then I smiled. The bill for your perfect family is finally coming due, Marcus. His expression instantly changed. The house is sold. The bank accounts are frozen. Jasmine's apartment is gone too. So starting tomorrow, you'll be the one paying for their glamorous lifestyle. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase and stepped closer. Good luck. Marcus's confident expression collapsed into pure shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I turned around and walked away without waiting for a response. The game of switched roles was finally complete. Now the man who made promises would have to carry the full weight of 2 ungrateful people with empty pockets. And without my money holding everything together, the true nature of their parasitic relationship would finally be exposed. The next 6 months would become a living hell that stripped every layer of fake love away one by one. How long do you think Marcus will stay loyal once the gold mine disappears forever? 6 months passed quickly. I moved to Annapolis and settled into a quiet little coastal town. I bought an old woodworking shop and started over from scratch. There were no more complaints from Diane. No more crushing financial pressure. My hands were now covered with sawdust paint stains and rough calluses from carving wood instead of bleeding from rose thorns. For the first time in many years, my soul finally found peace. Late one evening, my phone vibrated softly. A text message appeared from an unfamiliar number, but I immediately knew who it was. Jasmine. She sent me a screenshot of a bank transfer. $500. Below it was a short message. Dad, this is my first paycheck. I'm sending you a small part of it to repay what I owe you. I'm sorry for everything that happened. I hope you stay healthy. I stared silently at the screen for a long time. Surprisingly, I felt no hatred, no triumph either, only a strange sense of calm. For the first time in her life, Jasmine had begun to understand the value of hard work. She finally understood what it meant to earn money with sacrifice and exhaustion instead of taking it for granted. Through a few old acquaintances, I eventually learned what happened after I left. The truth revealed itself almost immediately. Just as I predicted, Marcus abandoned Diane within the very first week, after discovering she no longer had a house savings or financial security. He disappeared as quickly as he had once appeared. Marcus never wanted responsibility. He only loved comfort funded by someone else. Diane and Jasmine were forced to rent a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. For the first time in years, they had to face rent payments, utility bills, groceries, and financial stress completely on their own. But the greatest punishment was never poverty. The greatest punishment was forcing them to face reality without my silent protection standing behind them. Only after the glamorous curtain finally fell did they realize the man they looked down on had been the very person keeping them from collapsing into the abyss. Every debt of loyalty and betrayal had finally been settled. But my story does not end with revenge. Because inside this small woodworking shop lies the most important lesson I want to leave behind for all of you. Stay with me for the final reflections, because if you are also living through injustice, abandonment, or silent sacrifice, you may discover the path that finally sets you free. The soft scent of pine wood drifted through my small woodworking shop in Annapolis. The golden evening sunlight stretched across the handcrafted benches I had built with my own hands. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and quietly admired my work. After 17 long years, my journey had finally ended in a silence filled with dignity. I may have lost a fake family, but I finally found myself again. Standing inside this workshop, I learned 3 painful lessons about life. The first lesson is about self-worth. Never measure your value based on the approval of ungrateful people. The second lesson is about respect. Love without respect is nothing more than a cruel form of emotional parasitism. And the final lesson is about kindness. Never allow your kindness to become an unlimited free service. The more easily you sacrifice yourself, the more people begin to treat your pain as your obligation. I looked at the simple wooden chair I had just finished building. It stood firm and strong. It was not sitting in seat 15 behind anyone else's spotlight. It belonged on a stage built by my own hands. If people refuse to give you the seat you deserve, then build your own stage. Do not beg for pity. Do not tolerate humiliation just to preserve the illusion of a happy family. My story is a warning to everyone, silently sacrificing themselves in the dark. Your silence does not make selfish people grateful. It only feeds their greed. Be brave enough to walk away once your limits have been crossed. Join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing for more real, emotional, and hard-hitting family stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. I turned off the lights and closed the door to the workshop behind me. The streets of Annapolis were glowing beneath the night sky. And for the first time in many years, I walked forward feeling completely free. My real life was only beginning now. I once thought I had seen the full extent of human cruelty after 31 years on the federal bench. I was wrong. It all began with a phone call at 6:47 in the morning. On the other end of the line was the sound of my daughter Claire sobbing uncontrollably. Through choking tears, Claire said I was in an accident, Dad. My husband pushed me. I lost the baby. It felt as though the world collapsed beneath my feet. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered across the floor. My grandchild was only 7 months old in the womb. The poor child never even had the chance to see the sunlight. My Claire was lying in a hospital bed suffering. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a glass of water, some snacks, make yourself comfortable, and remember this: the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose otherwise. Leave a number 1 in the comments so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. That morning in Asheville was strangely peaceful. Mist still drifted among the old pine trees. I was sitting on the porch with a hot cup of coffee. Life as a retired judge was supposed to pass quietly like that. But then the phone began ringing relentlessly. The sound shattered the silence. It signaled the arrival of a terrible storm. The shock quickly transformed into a burning fury. But it was not a reckless rage. It was the cold, clear-headed anger of a father, a man who had spent half his life defending the law. Daniel Voss, the name of my glamorous son-in-law, the wealthy CEO who never stopped preaching about morality. He was the one who did this. He had mercilessly pushed his wife down the stairs. He had killed his own flesh and blood. His cruelty went beyond every limit of human decency. I rushed to my car in a state of intense focus. My mind worked like a machine. During my years in the judiciary, I had faced thousands of criminals. I knew how to deal with people who believed they were above the law. The Voss family had money and power. They thought they could hide any crime. They thought they could use money to silence everyone. They were wrong. They forgot one important thing. They had just harmed the daughter of a federal judge. I would not allow my daughter to endure this injustice alone. A battle for justice and accountability officially began at that very moment. I would tear away Daniel Voss's mask before the entire world. He would pay for what he had done. As my car sped through the fog, the face of Daniel Voss filled my mind. A man so perfect it was unsettling. Handsome, successful, and born into a notorious billionaire dynasty. He was the CEO of a major financial corporation. My daughter Claire, an intelligent woman with a successful career of her own, had been blinded by that aura. She truly believed she had found the man of her dreams. I, however, felt differently. After 31 years on the federal bench, I had learned how to see beneath the surface. I never trusted that son-in-law of mine. From the very first family gathering where I met him, I sensed something was wrong. When Daniel looked at Claire, I did not see the eyes of a man in love. I saw the eyes of a predator. A sickening sense of possession was evident in every gesture. He wanted to control Claire. He viewed my daughter as nothing more than an expensive ornament to enhance his image of perfection. The arrogance of the Voss family ran in their blood. They looked at the world through the eyes of those who believed they were entitled to decide everyone else's fate. To them, money could buy anything. The law was merely a toy for the poor. Jeffrey Voss, Daniel's father, was a seasoned fox in the business world. He had taught his son that nothing mattered more than the interests of the family. No one, not even a wife or child, was allowed to stand in their way. When Claire became pregnant, I thought the arrival of a child might soften that cold-hearted man. My daughter was so happy. She counted the days until she could welcome her first child into the world. The baby, 7 months along, was growing strong and healthy. That child was the hope of our entire family. But to the Voss family, the baby seemed to be a threat to the enormous fortune they controlled. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. A cold fury surged through my chest. My poor Claire had been living with a devil wearing the mask of an angel. She had been far too innocent to see through the promises and declarations of love. She had no idea that behind the grand doors of the Vale Mansion a dark conspiracy was taking shape. A conspiracy so sinister that even in her worst nightmares she could never have imagined it. My car was approaching the hospital. The constant wail of ambulance sirens made the atmosphere even more suffocating. I knew I had to remain strong for my daughter. But one question kept drilling deeper into my mind. Why would a husband be so cruel to his pregnant wife? What had happened behind the veil of secrecy at the Vale Mansion that night? What earth-shattering secret had my daughter accidentally overheard from Daniel and his father that made them determined to eliminate that innocent child at any cost? I walked into the hospital room with a heavy heart. Claire lay there, her face pale and drained of all color. Her swollen, lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. When she saw me, tears began streaming down her cheeks again. I wrapped my arms around her trembling, fragile shoulders. I listened in silence. I let her tell me the entire dark truth hidden behind the walls of the Vale mansion. It had all begun the night before. Claire had gone downstairs to get a glass of warm water. As she passed the study, she noticed the light was still on. Heated voices were coming from inside. It was Daniel and his father, Jeffrey Voss. She was about to walk in when she froze after hearing the words trust fund. Something in her instincts told her that something was wrong. She quietly stood behind the thick wooden door and began listening. The words spoken by those two men sent a chill down Claire's spine. Jeffrey Voss was furious. He slammed his hand on the desk and began talking about an inheritance clause in the family trust. It turned out that if the child in Claire's womb was born, 1/3 of the family fortune and corporate control would automatically be transferred into the child's name. That would mean Jeffrey's absolute authority would be weakened. He could not accept that. He viewed his unborn grandchild as a threat. Daniel did not object. He agreed with his father. The words Claire repeated to me filled me with overwhelming rage. He said the child had come at the wrong time. He viewed his own flesh and blood as a problem that needed to be solved in order to maintain control of the money. The two of them calmly discussed ways to delay the birth or find legal grounds to strip the child of inheritance rights. Their lack of humanity was horrifying. They possessed not a shred of compassion. All they saw were numbers and checks. Claire stood frozen in place. Her entire body felt weak. The 7-month-old baby gently moved inside her womb, as though seeking protection from its mother. Yet its father and grandfather were treating it like an obstacle that needed to be removed. The betrayal was too great. It was more than any woman could bear. I could feel my blood boiling as I listened. The moral decay of the wealthy Voss family was fully exposed. They were willing to sacrifice anything to protect their throne of wealth and power. Claire's voice broke into silent sobs as she reached this part of the story. She decided she could not remain silent. She pushed open the door and stepped inside to confront her husband. But she had no idea that this courageous act would place her directly in danger. How did Daniel Voss's perfect mask finally shatter when his wife exposed him? When the study door burst open, Daniel turned around. Claire stood there, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes burned with fury. Through her pain, she screamed, demanding to know how he could be so cruel to his own child. Jeffrey Voss remained silent. He stepped back and watched coldly. As for Daniel, the perfect husband, everyone knew he suddenly transformed completely. Claire's description of that moment sent chills down my spine. There was not a trace of emotion left on his face. The warm eyes she saw every day had become two hollow, lifeless pits. The perfect mask fell away, revealing a cold-blooded monster underneath. He took slow steps toward Claire. No explanation. No remorse. He looked at her only as an enemy who possessed a secret that could destroy him. In a low, threatening voice, he growled, "You were never supposed to hear any of this." Terrified, Claire backed away. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, protecting her 7-month-old baby. He forced her all the way into the hallway, right to the edge of the steep staircase. His greed had driven him beyond reason. Daniel struck. He shoved Claire hard in the shoulder. A brutal, deliberate push. She tumbled down the unforgiving stone steps. Claire's desperate screams echoed throughout the grand yet cold Vale mansion. He stood at the top of the staircase and watched his wife fall without making the slightest attempt to help her. By that point, I could no longer contain myself. I gripped my daughter's ice-cold hand. The cold fury inside me reached its peak. I looked directly into Claire's eyes. I did not tell her that everything would be all right the way weaker fathers often do. I was a judge. I knew nothing would ever be all right as long as the criminal remained free. I leaned close to her ear and made a solemn vow. "I promise you this Daniel Voss will pay with both his reputation and his life as he knows it. I will bring justice back for my grandchild." I stood up and walked out of the hospital room. Grief had now given way to a flawless battle plan. My opponent was a massive financial empire. They had money connections and the finest lawyers available to twist the truth. But they had underestimated a father driven by vengeance. I knew exactly what I had to do. I picked up my phone and began activating my network. What secret cards was federal judge Richard Harmon about to reveal in his battle against the Voss family? I walked down the hospital corridor. The sound of my solitary footsteps echoed steadily. My anger transformed into something cold and razor-sharp. My opponents were powerful. The Voss family controlled enormous resources. They could bribe witnesses. They could destroy evidence. But they had made one fatal mistake. They believed I was nothing more than a retired old man. I stopped at the far end of the hallway and dialed the first number. Sandra Chen, the finest attorney in the region. She had once been my student. I briefly explained Claire's situation. No lengthy explanation was necessary. Sandra immediately understood her assignment. She would send an emergency preservation notice to the Vale mansion at once. A strict legal hold would prevent the Voss family from tampering with the scene. Every security camera, every phone record, and every piece of evidence had to be preserved. But the legal battle was only half the war. To bring down an empire, I needed the truths they had buried. I dialed the second number. This call was for my brother Thomas Harmon. Thomas was a veteran and a former FBI investigator specializing in financial crimes. He was a ghost in every sense of the word. A man who operated in the shadows and always uncovered what others desperately tried to hide. The Voss family had absolutely no idea Thomas even existed within my circle. I spoke into the phone. Daniel killed our grandchild. I need you to uncover every stain on his name. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. I could hear my brother drawing a deep breath filled with fury. Thomas replied with only a single sentence. Give me 72 hours. The hidden battlefield had been established. Some of the sharpest minds in law and investigation were now in position. We would not confront the Voss family with brute force. We would tighten the noose around their necks with evidence they could never deny. That night, the hunt began. Thomas traveled all the way to Chicago, where Daniel had built his career before marrying Claire. What horrifying secrets would the former FBI investigator uncover in the past of this seemingly perfect CEO? The next 72 hours felt like an eternity. I remained by Claire's hospital bed the entire time. Watching my daughter suffer both physically and emotionally tore at my heart. But I knew I could not afford to break. With each passing hour, Thomas sent me updates. His relentless investigation in Chicago had begun peeling away Daniel Voss's carefully crafted facade. It turned out that pushing Claire down the stairs was not the first time this man had used violence to solve his problems. Thomas uncovered a sealed file dating back 5 years. In Chicago, a female employee had once accused Daniel of assault. She had been forced into silence with a settlement worth millions of dollars. The Voss family had used its influence to erase every trace of the incident from the media. They had turned the victim into a liar. Daniel Voss was a systematic predator. He always used money to silence anyone who stood in his way. But this time, his target was my daughter. The Voss family's protection had created a monster that feared nothing. Yet the biggest breakthrough was not in Chicago. It was inside the Vale mansion itself, where Claire had been attacked. Under the cover of a maintenance technician, Thomas gained access to the building's network. There he discovered a secret that even the Voss father and son had forgotten. Jeffrey Voss, a man who trusted no one, had installed a hidden audio recording system in every executive office 15 years earlier. He had originally done it to monitor business partners, and even his own son. But as the years passed and his confidence in his power grew, Jeffrey had completely forgotten the system existed. The aging equipment had continued operating silently in the shadows. It recorded every sound and every conversation that took place inside that fateful room. Thomas successfully extracted all the data from the night of the incident. The original audio file was protected by an outdated encryption algorithm. For a former FBI specialist like Thomas, breaking it was only a matter of time. I received his message when the clock struck 3 in the morning. It contained only 4 words. I got the evidence. I stared out the hospital window. Dawn was approaching. The silence I had maintained for days was about to end. The legal noose was ready. How horrifying were the cold, unfiltered words spoken by Jeffrey and Daniel Voss on that hidden recording. Would the Voss empire realize before it was too late that they had personally tied the very noose that was now tightening around their own necks? The arrest warrant for Daniel Voss was issued late one afternoon. Police stormed the Vale mansion while the Voss father and son were having dinner. Jeffrey Voss showed no sign of panic. He calmly rose from his chair. The arrogance of a man who ruled an empire was written across his face. He looked at the officers and scoffed. He called the entire situation a ridiculous misunderstanding. Jeffrey believed that power and his team of multi-million-dollar attorneys would easily save his son. They thought they could twist the truth the way they always had. If you've followed the story this far, then you're probably finding it interesting. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a number 5 in the comments so I know you've made it this far, and share your prediction for how the story will end to see whether you're right. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. The Voss family's confidence rested on one assumption: the staircase scene had been thoroughly cleaned. There were no witnesses. There were no direct security cameras. Daniel Voss stood behind his father with a smug smile. He believed Claire's testimony alone would be crushed in court. He thought I was nothing more than a helpless father making a desperate attempt to fight back. But my satisfaction began the moment Thomas walked into the interrogation room. In his hand was a black hard drive. Thomas looked directly into Jeffrey Voss's eyes and pressed play. The recording lasted exactly 43 minutes. An original digital audio file that could not be forged. Thomas had uncovered 43 minutes of recorded evidence detailing the conspiracy to eliminate the unborn child. Jeffrey's voice came through clearly. We need to deal with the baby before it affects the trust. Then Daniel's voice followed. I'll take care of it. An accident will be the cleanest solution. The color immediately drained from Jeffrey Voss's face before turning a sickly gray. Daniel's triumphant smile froze on his polished face. The noose had tightened. At that moment, all the money and influence in the world became worthless in the face of such overwhelming evidence. For the first time, both father and son realized they had walked straight into a trap from which there was no escape. The federal courtroom was packed that day. The atmosphere was so solemn and suffocating that every anxious breath seemed audible. Reporters crowded the hallways outside. Everyone wanted to witness the downfall of one of the most powerful families in the country. Daniel Voss sat at the defense table. His expensive suit could no longer conceal his unease. The confidence he carried every day had completely vanished. In its place was overwhelming fear. Claire stood before the court as both a witness and a victim. She had lost weight, but the strength had returned to her eyes. I was not seated on the judge's bench that day. Instead, I sat in the gallery right beside my daughter. I was there not as a powerful federal judge. I was there as a father protecting his child. I wanted Daniel Voss to see that I would be the strongest wall standing behind Claire. Attorney Sandra Chen rose to her feet. She began presenting the facts of the case with her usual precision and sharpness. When Daniel attempted to deny every accusation, Sandra calmly requested permission to introduce the classified evidence. The judge nodded in approval. The courtroom audio system came to life. A suffocating silence fell across the entire courtroom as the recording began to play. Jeffrey Voss's cold, ruthless voice echoed through the chamber. Then came Daniel's chilling response about arranging a clean accident. The naked truth spoken by the Voss father and son cut through the silence like blades. Murmurs spread throughout the courtroom. People shook their heads in disbelief. Furious eyes turned toward the two men responsible for the crime. Daniel Voss lowered his head onto the table. He could not bring himself to look at anyone. The 43-minute recording completely stripped away the mask of the polished CEO. It exposed the monster underneath for everyone to see. The truth had been revealed beyond any possibility of denial. No amount of money, and not even the most expensive lawyers in the world, could save them now. The presiding judge's gavel struck with a sharp crack. The sound was like thunder, ending a long season of darkness. The entire courtroom held its breath. Daniel Voss rose to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. The arrogance he once carried had completely vanished. In its place stood a condemned man awaiting the final judgment of justice. The judge began reading the sentence. Each word rang through the courtroom with unmistakable force. Daniel Voss was sentenced to 18 years in prison for aggravated assault and conspiracy to harm an unborn child. Jeffrey Voss, the architect behind the scheme, received a 6-year federal sentence for aiding the crime and concealing criminal conduct. 18 years and 6 years. That was the price they would pay with their freedom for valuing wealth above human life. A deep sense of satisfaction filled my chest as I watched the handcuffs snap around Daniel's wrists. He looked toward Claire and me with pleading eyes. But it was far too late. Justice had been carried out completely. This victory required no violence. It was built through perseverance, truth, and respect for the law. Yet the downfall of the Voss family did not end behind prison walls. The verdict triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the entire family legacy. Shares of Voss Financial collapsed immediately after the trial. Business partners rushed to distance themselves from the company. The most symbolic moment came a week later. The Voss family name was officially removed from the City Art Museum's Wall of Honor. It was the complete collapse of people who once believed they were untouchable. Money could not purchase honor once that honor had been stained by the blood of the innocent. I held Claire tightly as the courtroom slowly emptied. She cried, but this time they were tears of relief. The battle that had lasted 14 long months was finally over. The Voss Empire had become nothing more than a dark chapter of the past. Yet when the fire of vengeance finally faded, I discovered an unexpected emptiness within myself. The tragedy had left deep emotional scars on both of us. After exposing the crimes of others, I realized that healing would be our next challenge. Several weeks later, Claire and I sat together on the porch of my home in Asheville. The same pine trees swayed gently in the breeze. The evening sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Dad, do you think they were always evil?" I looked out toward the horizon before answering. "No. I think they spent so much time chasing power that they forgot what power was supposed to be for." Claire lowered her eyes. "They had everything." "Yes," I replied softly. "And that was the problem. They believed having everything entitled them to do anything." The wind rustled through the trees. I placed my hand over hers. "Power is a tool, Claire. It can build a family, protect people, and create opportunities. But when power becomes more important than people, it turns into a weapon. That's what destroyed them." She nodded slowly. "And what about us?" I smiled for the first time in many months. "We keep living. We honor those we lost by refusing to become like the people who hurt us." Tears formed in her eyes once more, but this time there was peace in them. That evening, neither of us spoke much after that. We simply sat together and watched the sun disappear beyond the mountains. For 31 years I had believed that justice was about verdicts, sentences, and courtrooms. I was wrong. Justice is only the beginning. The harder task is learning how to heal after the truth has finally been revealed. And sometimes the greatest victory is not bringing down an empire. Sometimes it is helping the people you love find the strength to smile again. The presiding judge's gavel struck with a sharp crack. The sound was like thunder bringing an end to a long season of darkness. The entire courtroom held its breath. Daniel Voss rose to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. The arrogance he once carried had completely disappeared. In its place was the face of a condemned man awaiting judgment from justice itself. The judge began reading the sentence. Each word echoed through the courtroom with unmistakable force. Daniel Voss was sentenced to 18 years in prison for aggravated assault and conspiracy to kill an unborn child. Jeffrey Voss, the mastermind behind the scheme, received a 6-year federal prison sentence for aiding the crime and concealing criminal conduct. 18 years and 6 years, that was the price they would pay with their freedom for valuing wealth above human life. A deep sense of satisfaction surged through me as I watched the handcuffs snap around Daniel's wrists. He looked toward Claire and me with pleading eyes. But it was far too late. Justice had been carried out completely. This sweet revenge required no violence. It was built through perseverance and respect for the rule of law. Yet the downfall of the Voss family did not end behind prison walls. The ripple effects of the verdict destroyed the entire family legacy. Shares of Voss Financial plummeted immediately after the trial. Business partners rushed to distance themselves from the company. The most symbolic moment came a week later. The Voss family name was officially chiseled away and removed from the City Art Museum's Wall of Honor. It was the complete collapse of people who once believed they were untouchable. Money could not buy honor once it had been stained by the blood of the innocent. I held Claire tightly as people gradually left the courtroom. She cried, but this time they were tears of relief. The battle that had lasted 14 long months was finally over. The Voss Empire had faded into a dark chapter of the past. Yet when the fire of vengeance finally cooled, I discovered a great silence within my soul. The tragedy had left deep emotional scars on both of us. After exposing the crimes of others, how would an old judge like me help my daughter continue the journey toward healing? What lesson about power would emerge from our final conversation together? Claire and I returned to our small home in Asheville. The fog had lifted. Warm sunlight filtered through the old pine trees. We sat together on the porch. 2 cups of hot tea released gentle streams of steam into the morning air. After 14 long months, I finally saw my daughter smile again. It was a smile of relief and peace. I looked at Claire and reflected on everything that had happened. This legal system can sometimes be unfair to those without money. People like the Voss family always believe they can build walls of protection out of wealth and influence. But they were wrong. Never underestimate the silence of people who understand the truth. Power and money may hide wrongdoing for a time, but the kindness, wisdom, and persistence of someone who genuinely cares will always find a crack through which the truth can emerge. Justice may arrive late, but it is unavoidable. Blind arrogance will always lead to ruin. Claire's emotional wounds would take time to heal, but she was ready to move forward. The ordeal had made her far stronger than before. Thank you for staying with Dad's real-life revenge until the end of this story. Join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing to enjoy more gripping and realistic family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space.